To all members of the Governance and Strategic Planning Committee, you're hereby summoned to attend the monthly meeting of the committee, which will be a hybrid meeting to be conducted remotely via WebEx and physically here in the Council Chamber, Derry, on Tuesday the 10th of January at now 4:08 p.m. Starting with the roll call, Alderman Breslin.
John, I think Alan has bothered getting online and I sent in a wee message just to resend maybe the invitation to him.
I resent it.
It's been resent, we think, Alderman Devaney, so thank you for that.
That's okay.
Alderman Devaney, present. Here. Alderman Hussey. Alderman Thompson.
Present, John.
Councillor Raymond Barr.
Here, John.
Councillor Donnelly.
And Shaw.
Councillor Farrell.
Here online.
Councillor Jackson. Councillor Heaney. Councillor McGinley.
And Shaw.
Councillor McHugh. Councillor Mooney.
Sorry, I'm here.
Online there.
I have you there, Councillor McHugh, thank you. Councillor Norris. Councillor Tierney.
Here.
Thank you, members.
It's only when John's is off.
Happy days, thank you. That moves us on to item 3, which is the broadcasting statement. I would like to remind everyone present at this meeting in the Guildhall or in attendance remotely that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. This broadcast may be terminated or suspended in accordance with our protocol. Due to your attendance at this meeting, you are consenting to being filmed and to the use and storage of those images for broadcasting or training purposes and for the purpose of keeping historical records and making those records available to the public. Members and approved speakers are reminded to only have their mics and cameras on while speaking at the meeting and to use the chat facility to highlight a request to speak. A copy of the Council's privacy notice may be found on the Council website. Item 4 of today's meeting is a declaration of members' interests. People can declare now or they can do so throughout the meeting. Alderman Hussey.
Item 12, I declare an interest in McHenry as member of the Apprentice Boys of Derry Campsite Club Castledare branch.
No problem, that's noted. And as I say, throughout the meeting, if there's any declarations of interest that any member feels that they need to declare, please feel free to do so at any stage. Which moves us to item 5, which is our deputation today. And I would like to welcome Professor Jerry McKenna, Professor John Goddard, Tim Atwood and Sean Farren to today's meeting to give our presentation, their presentation. So at this stage, I will hand over to you and you can give the presentation. And after that, we will then open it up for questions from members or comments. So thank you.
Sorry to unmute.
Yeah, we're here now.
Jerry, you need to.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now, Jerry. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Apologies for that. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting us. It's taken a little while to get the meeting together, but we're here anyway at this stage, and we're delighted to speak to the Council on what we think are very important issues. As you've indicated, we have a number of representatives here today from both the Royal Irish Academy and the Hume Foundation, including Sean Farren, the chair of the Hume Foundation, Tim Atwood, the secretary. I think Paul Arthur might be around somewhere. Mark Durgan, I think, is also possibly in attendance. From the Academy, there's myself and Roisin Smith, the program manager, policy and international relations, who has been involved in this particular development from the outset, and Jennifer Keneally, also from policy and international relations, who has also played a very important part in the whole issue of regional development. So I think the representation indicates the priority with which we feel this issue of the Northwest and higher education in the Northwest requires. If we could move to the next slide. The background to this particular initiative was the establishment in 2020 by the Academy, by the President and officers, of a Higher Education Futures Task Force, which was established to develop a vision for the higher education sector on the island of Ireland up to 2035. And it was developed against the background of major changes that were occurring both globally. Could we go back one, please? We go back. It was developed against the background of major changes that were occurring both globally and locally. Obviously, we were in the midst of COVID-19. We were experiencing the impact of Brexit, the development of new modalities for delivering higher education. We were seeing technological university development in Ireland. There were various regional pressures, issues to do with access and inclusion, the recognition of the importance of a strong research base for the future economic development of the island, and Ireland, Northern Ireland, collaborative opportunities and challenges. So we could move to the next slide. So we established the consultation exercise in 2020, and we received inputs from over 100 organizations, stakeholders, interested parties, and individuals. The task force itself was made up of 37 individuals. I should say that they were representative of the sector and indeed some of the stakeholders. It was interesting that not one person who was asked to join that task force refused to do so. So I think that reflected the importance that they regarded the issue to be, and also I think reflected the convening powers of the Royal Irish Academy. The Academy, as you may know, was established in 1785. It is the national academy for the island of Ireland, covering the sciences, social sciences, and humanities, and is entirely independent. The task force divided into 5 subgroups, and they produced reports around about a year ago. And those reports dealt with vision for higher education up to 2035, future landscape of higher education, and particularly of importance for today, regions and place in higher education across the island, but also dealt with equality, diversity, and inclusion, and the whole area of research and innovation in higher education in Ireland and Northern Ireland. Next slide, please. And so we produced 5 reports, and those are all available and can be accessed through the Royal Irish Academy website on the topics that I've just mentioned. Next slide. So in terms of the vision really was about that higher education is about talent development, it's about research excellence, it's about creativity and innovation in support of economic, social, and cultural development. We're moving increasingly to the personalization of learning linked to changing student, local, and regional communities and demand for greater societal benefit. Promotion of citizenship, including tolerance and commitment to individuals, community, and the environment. And these are issues that perhaps we took for granted in the past, but as we've seen in the developments in the world in recent years, they're things that have to be nurtured and indeed managed and constantly refreshed. We're also accepting the reality of hybrid campus model that is both face-to-face and online program delivery in support of an increasingly diverse student and staff community, and flexible learning pathways and entry routes to higher education that people can join and exit at all stages of adult life. And most importantly, that A diverse system allows higher education institutions to achieve their full potential as centres of learning, knowledge creation and creativity. Next slide. The future landscape, as I've mentioned already, will be more diverse in terms of learning and teaching, more inclusive student population, which will be different and will have changing needs as we move forward. Research will be increasingly inter and cross-disciplinary, collaborative in nature, greater citizen participation, of course, underpinned by the highest ethical standards and integrity, greater societal engagement in higher education, close cooperation and involvement with all sections of society in support of local, regional and national development and priorities. And as I mentioned earlier, there will be a spectrum of higher education institutions, but they will be more integrated, more networked, more spatially configured as part of a system of distributed excellence. Next slide. So at this point, I'll hand over to Professor Goddard. Professor Goddard is from the University of Newcastle, the University of Birmingham, and many other places as well. He is an international expert in the whole area of regional development, hugely respected in the higher education and policy sector. He is particularly interested in the whole question of why geography matters in higher education. So John, if you could speak to the next couple of slides.
Thank you very much. It's a great honour to be with you, because after many decades working to mobilise universities in support of regional development within countries, it's inspiring for me to learn of an initiative to do this across a very significant border between countries, one inside and the other outside of the European Union. And it's been really very interesting to read your report, Jerry, on the role of regions and place in higher education across the island of Ireland as a whole. I think it's a really first-rate report on what the issues are. And I guess one of the challenges, as I say in this slide, in most countries, including the UK and particularly highly centralised countries like the UK and Ireland, higher education and research policy have really been what I would call territorially blind. People responsible for higher education, by and large, don't think about its geography, where research is undertaken, where the benefits in terms of translation of research into innovation accrue, and where students are taught, graduates employed. They've been, broadly speaking, of little concern in the past. And equally, and I'm delighted to be talking to a city council, because quite often higher education has not been a concern of those responsible for the development of places in the round, economic, social, cultural community. And that's particularly what local government's responsible. It's responsible for the place in the round. And also, local government has been funded separately and regulated by central governments, and equally, further education has been separated from higher education in many countries. And so one of the consequences of all this is that higher education capacity in Northern Ireland, in England, is being concentrated in big capital cities. In a way, there's been an economic argument for this, that this agglomeration creates surpluses of income through taxation and contributions to economic growth, and somehow that can be used to trickle down across the country. Quite frankly, it doesn't work, trickle-down theory, but in practice, a lot of people argue for it. So that's the past. What about the future? Next slide, please. What I think we're facing now is a series of global challenges, many of which have a local dimension. Most notably, very interestingly, during the pandemic, people started behaving in a different way, collaborating across disciplines, across functions in government. It made a big difference. It had also a differential impact. Some of the poorer places had the worst impact of COVID. You have climate change, which is both a global and local issue. And clearly all the things associated with the war in Ukraine are, through the energy hike, price hike, having differential impacts. And so this is leading to a reappraisal in some quarters of the role that universities can play in the development of their communities, particularly those that are most disadvantaged, both those communities both within cities and in peripheral regions. And this reappraisal has moved ahead very rapidly in the European Union, where there's been previous separate policy divides between higher education, regional development, research and innovation, and the skills agenda. And the European Commission is beginning to join things up a bit. And there's in this slide a lot of examples of interesting things that are happening at the EU. And I won't go into them all, but broadly speaking, it's about bringing higher education together, working with a range of other bodies concerned with the development of places. And in the UK, it's very interesting. There's been a dialogue about the role of university in the so-called levelling up agenda. Now, that's a politically hot topic at the moment, and some would argue that levelling up is dead in the water, given the turmoil in UK politics. But nevertheless, my experience is many universities and local partners are really committed to the role of universities in contributing to place-based driven initiatives. And many universities and local partners in England are doing what recently has been said by Keir Starmer, taking back control of the levelling up agenda from the bottom upward. And this is where it comes to life. How do you do this even you've got these obstacles at the national level? Can you, from the bottom up, in the sort of partnerships you're talking about in North West Ireland, shape a national agenda? So in the UK now, what we've got is a national civic impact accelerator program, which follows on by the establishment of a civic university network. And that's building on a lot of work that's been done on the UK by the Independent Civic University Commission, which I was vice chair of. And I'm really excited by your initiative because I think it's a real opportunity to make a contribution to the peace dividend where the universities work in partnership across the borders of the North and South. And there's a lot that could be learned from what's going on in the EU and what's going on in England, and hopefully filters down into Northern Ireland. So I'm very delighted to be with you, and I'll hand you back to Jerry. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Next slide, please. So what did we conclude through the task force in terms of regions and place and the keynote outcomes in terms of the Northwest? Well, first of all, we felt very strongly, based on the submissions and based on analysis of other places, that regional higher education and further education focus is required beyond the major cities on the island, that is Dublin and Belfast, to maximize economic, social and cultural development and stability. The technological universities in the south are an excellent innovation, and they have a crucial role in regional development and delivering distributed excellence across the island. But of course, they are limited to the Republic. We felt very strongly that there was a need and an essential need for an independent and coordinated tertiary education planning body for the Northwest region, supported by the UK, supported by Ireland and the European Union through various initiatives, funding initiatives, including Peace Plus, UK Levelling Up funds, Shared Island funds, and other funds to integrate the tertiary education provision, such as to maximize the potential of the Northwest region and ameliorate the consequences of historic underinvestment in the region from both jurisdictions, which goes back 100 years. We felt there was great scope for collaborative programs between the further education sectors in border regions right around the border of Northern Ireland and the Republic to reduce the disadvantage of peripherality. Borders do bring disadvantage wherever they are, and communities on one side or other side of the border are disadvantaged through their location, and there is a need for steps to be taken to ameliorate that. And then obviously we were interested in agile systems of program design and a smart focus being applied to offerings and performance. Next slide. Of course, if you talk about a region, you have to define a region. And we, for the purposes of our work, defined the region as the Greater Northwest, spanning essentially north of Galway through Sligo, Letterkenny, Londonderry, Derry, which is the hub, and Coleraine, including their respective hinterlands. And of course, the other thing that jumped out at us very clearly was not just the higher education, but the infrastructure deficit generally. If you look at road, rail, air communications, there is a massive black hole in relation to the northwest region of the island. There's also an innovation deficit, which is hardly surprising given these other problems. If you look at the European Union Regional Innovation Scorecard, the north and west regions of Ireland, this is the Republic, are scoring as moderate versus strong for the rest of the country. And more recently, the northwest of Ireland has been defined within the EU as a lagging region, where its performance is 72% of the EU gross domestic product per capita. And that's a fall from 82% in 5 years, which is pretty staggering. And if we would take the next slide, you can see that on the map there. The Great Britain and Northern Ireland are essentially not coloured because they're no longer in the EU. But if you look at the EU regions, the darker blue means high performance in terms of GDP. The lighter colours mean low performance. And you'll see that there on that, the northwest of the Republic of Ireland is a poor performer relative to the rest of Ireland, never mind the stronger performing regions of the EU. Next slide. And then if we move to Northern Ireland and compare that to the Republic of Ireland, and citing the work of Bergen and McGuinness here through the Economic and Social Research Institute of Ireland, you'll see that the performance, if you take the top two lines, you'll see that the growth, real growth, during the period 1998 to 2020 was 2.9% for Ireland, minus 1% for the for Northern Ireland, and so that again reflects the poor performance of Northern Ireland overall. But if we take the next slide, within Northern Ireland, the poorest performing region in terms of productivity is Derry City and Strabane, not passed much by Fermanagh and Omagh, but well below what's happening in Belfast. And that gap between the performance in Belfast and Derry City and Strabane actually has grown in the last 20 years. So trickling down has not actually happened to any great degree, as John alluded to earlier. Next slide. But the most staggering figure, I think, that came out of our work was looking at the percentage of higher education students based in capital cities across these islands. And the figure for Northern Ireland, for Belfast, is 75% and actually growing. If you look at Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, it's 41% in Dublin, 25% in Edinburgh in Scotland, 33% in Cardiff in Wales, and 21% in London. That's a staggering figure. And I think it is something that really is intolerable as we go forward. Next slide. So if we look at the Greater Northwest as a region, you have a plethora of institutions, all with terrifically great resources and capabilities in various ways. You have the Ulster University, the McGee campus, the Coleraine campus, you have the Northwest Regional College, you have the Southwest College, you have the Equine College in Enniskillen, and then across the border, there's the Atlantic Technological University, 8 campuses covering from Letterkenny, Sligo, Galway, Mayo, and Leitrim. And NUI Galway is also a player in the sense that it has particular activities in relation to medical education, but also in terms of Irish studies in Gweedore. So you have significant number of institutions, but they're all autonomous, independent institutions charting their own way in their own particular set of priorities. And I think an important point that we wanted to make is that there is no systematic cross-border planning oversight in support of the efficient use of campuses, the promotion of regional strengths and niches in the region as a whole. The point I think that I would want to stress here is that whilst we support very strongly institutional autonomy, that does not prevent, nor can it supersede, the essential need for oversight and planning, which is non-existent at the moment. Next slide. If you look particularly at Northern Ireland, you have 9 autonomous independent institutions offering higher education. You've the University of Ulster, you've Queen's University, you've 6 further education colleges, and you have the Agricultural College, all acting entirely independently of each other. And so if you wanted to find out what the strategy for higher education in Northern Ireland is, you'd have to take their strategic plans, each of them, and staple them together. But that is not a strategic plan. So there is no Northern Ireland higher education strategy effectively. There is no oversight of higher education, which is unique, I have to say, across these islands. There is oversight in the Republic, there's oversight in Scotland, Wales, and England, but not in Northern Ireland. Next slide. That's not to say, by the way, that there have not been substantial innovations in the Northwest, and these have to be commended, and some individuals have played a huge role, including local government, etc., in those. You have, for example, the Further Education, Higher Education Cluster, you have the Growth Partnership, you have the City Deal, which is coming along, and then there's also activities in relation to the Causeway Coast and Lens. Over the border, you have the Atlantic Technological University, which is making terrific strides, and you have NUI Galway. I mentioned its medical activities, but also its support of Irish in Gweedore. Next slide. But these are all things that have happened individually. They're not. It's not part of some overall proper, coordinated, or planned strategy. And just looking at the reality of the Northwest, you can see that Dublin has a parliament. It has government departments. Banks and financial capital is based there. Belfast, similarly, has sometimes has a parliament and sometimes it has a government, but nonetheless, that's where it's located when it is in existence. But you also have the banks, the financial capital, and all the lobbying power that goes with that based there. The Northwest is peripheral in both jurisdictions. Next slide. So we see a potential Northwest economic corridor where higher education plays a massively important role, stretching from Galway to Coleraine, with Derry, Londonderry as a central hub, based on the needs of the region, developed by the region. So you need cross-border regional planning and oversight, irrespective of jurisdictional constraints. That requires sustained planning, it requires commitment, it requires investment, it requires infrastructure, as we mentioned earlier, communications, business infrastructure, and most importantly, the support and the involvement and the development of higher education. So it needs to be focused on the region to allow it to develop its natural strengths, its niches, as part of an intellectual, economic, and cultural corridor, separate and distinct from Belfast and from Dublin, and from the Belfast-Dublin economic corridor, which is a very good idea and something which we would support. But nonetheless, that is separate. And that requires the working together of the Irish government, the Northern Ireland Executive, the UK government, and the European Union. Next slide. So we have 15 plus campuses. There's enormous potential to exploit the academic and research synergies that exist there. That requires the efficient use of infrastructure, doesn't need more campuses, doesn't necessarily need more buildings. But it needs oversight. It needs to be overseen by a cross-border independent planning body focused on the needs and opportunities of the region and inputting to relevant government departments in both jurisdictions. In the longer term, it would seem logical that a tertiary federation would develop. A federal institution would be an obvious thing, which could be and would span the border. Just we have the next slide. those who say that you can't have, or it's very difficult to have cross-border institutions, there are a number in existence and have been for some time, working extremely well for the benefit of both jurisdictions and the people of the island, and they're listed there: Waterways Ireland, Safe Food, Intertrade Ireland, Forest na Gaeilge, Ulster Scots Agency, Lochs Agency, Tourism Ireland, etc. Next slide. I'm pleased to say that the Shared Island Unit, working with the Research Council, the Irish Research Council, has funded a project in the Royal Irish Academy, which we will develop with the Hume Foundation, a scoping study to look at regional higher education strategies, policies and provision in the northwest of Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and indeed the north of England. And that will look at regional approaches to higher education policy and provision across the regions, how they've worked, what might be beneficial, particularly for the northwest. Explore the potential for the impact of place-based collaborative approaches to education provision, and examine trends in educational migration for third-level education across the devolved nations of Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland and Ireland. No region can afford to lose its talent through outward migration of higher education, net outward migration of higher education students, and that is a running sore in the case of Northern Ireland, where about the equivalent of another university actually studies in Great Britain every year, and the cap on student numbers is a sore that should have been removed some time ago. Next slide. So just to finish, we take quotes from our task force report. Solutions to regional inequality need to be place sensitive, with policies that are informed by theory and empirical evidence, but also respond to the structural opportunities, the potential constraints of each place. And I would quote the distinguished economist Andres Rodriguez Pose saying that recent history, and he's thinking, of course, and mentioned North America, the United States, the north of England in terms of Brexit, recent history should teach us to beware of the revenge of places that don't matter. And our lesson, our message is that the greater Northwest should not be left behind. So I'll stop there, and Sean Farron will say a few words of summary to put it all in context. Thank you, Sean. Sean, we can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Here, yeah.
Yeah. Hi. Well, good afternoon, members of the council, and I thank you for your kind invitation to the Hume Foundation to appear alongside the delegation from the Royal Irish Academy as we discuss the critical issues highlighted very acutely by Professor McKenna, dealing with further and higher education in this part of Ireland. And on behalf of the John and Pat Hume Foundation, of which I am chair of the board, I'm pleased that the foundation is participating in today's hearing on the future of further and higher education in the Northwest. I hope I'm joined at this stage by my colleagues from the board, Mark Durkin and Professor Paul Arthur, and they're here along with our secretary, Tim Atwood. Can I say a few words at this stage about the John and Pat Hume Foundation? It was established in 2020 to both commemorate the legacy of John and Pat Hume and to sustain that legacy for this and indeed for future generations. The foundation is cross-community in the membership of our board. Our patrons are former President Mary McAleese and her husband Martin, Senator George Mitchell, Seamus Mallon posthumously, and Nadia Murad, the Yazidi human rights activist awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for her defense and advocacy of women's rights, especially in situations of violent conflict. Alongside them, we have an advisory council whose members make themselves available to assist and advise the board in developing its programs. That council is also cross-community in its composition. And details of our programs can be found on the Foundation's website, humefoundation.org. The Foundation, can I say, is very conscious that one of John Hume's early ventures into the public arena was his role in the campaign to ensure that opportunities for higher stroke university education would be available in this, his native city. In this regard, we recall that he, along with the Unionist mayor of the city at the time, Albert Anderson, and the Nationalist MP for the area, Eddie McAteer, they had a huge motorcade to Stormont to plead the case for the North Second University to be located in the city, to plead that case with the Northern Ireland government at the time. That campaign was very much cross-community, a characteristic that John was very anxious to ensure. But nonetheless, and regrettably, the campaign at that time was not successful. With respect to the issues pertaining to further and higher education today, the Foundation is facilitating discussion on how we can ensure that education at those levels is developed and flourishes in the Greater Northwest, as defined by Professor McKenna in his presentation. We are aware that within the Greater Northwest, further and higher education institutions are already providing education and training to tens of thousands of students. They promote research, local, regional, and global in its application, as well as contributing significantly to the social, cultural, and economic development of the region. We are also aware that these institutions are already on the cusp of significant development. In the Republic, as Professor McKenna has pointed out, the recently established Atlantic Technological University embraces several pre-existing institutions. And so too are our universities and regional colleges on this side of the border in the early stages of significant development programs. Despite the many examples of cross-border cooperation between these institutions, there has been no in-depth, let alone joint account taken of current and future higher and further education needs of the region. To begin redressing that absence, the Foundation, in association with the Royal Irish Academy, organised a very successful one-day conference on this very issue last October, entitled The Future Development of Higher and Further Education in the Greater Northwest of Ireland. The conference heard from several experts, among them Professor John Goddard, who has just spoken, who highlighted, among other issues, the very serious and grave imbalance in the provision of higher and further education between the eastern and western regions of Northern Ireland. This was particularly highlighted by the fact, again highlighted by Professor McKenna, that approximately 80% of the students in these categories, that is further and higher education, attend institutions in the eastern region. And of course, this gap, this huge difference between the numbers attending institutions of further and higher education in the East and the West mirrors significant other deficits and imbalances in the social economic spheres. The title of the conference indicates that we were not only taking an exclusively Northern Ireland focused approach to the provision of higher and further education. We wish to see a much greater degree of cross-border north-south planning and coordination. And to that end, we have very strongly recommended that both governments, together with hopefully a restored Northern Ireland executive and in consultation with local authorities and the institutions themselves, that they will engage in a joint consideration of the higher and further education needs of the region and to make appropriate recommendations. Such a joint exercise would very hopefully produce a development blueprint that would map the future of higher and further education in the region, with Derry at the hub of that development. It would be an initiative that John and Pat Hume would strongly endorse. Back to you, Jerry. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sean. We're happy to attempt to answer any questions or receive comments from council members.
Thank you, Jerry, John and Sean, for that comprehensive presentation and your comments. My first indicated speaker at this stage is Councillor Donnelly.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to all those who contributed. Look, I would like to thank the Royal Irish Academies, you know, the work that they have done and their focus in the Northwest. And, you know, it's such an initiative, if it was realised, would drive the whole economic, social and cultural development of this part of the island. And as has been said, underpinning a Northwest economic corridor with unique strengths and opportunities. And given the, you know, as I said in a motion to the council, given the magnitude of these proposals and potential benefits to the city and region, you know, what can council do to progress, you know, these proposals, plans, or blueprint? Because, you know, it has been said that there's a historic underinvestment, and my opinion is just outright discrimination. You know, the benefits from a proper and vibrant university is, you know, it can be seen. I was in Liverpool recently, and it was just full of people from this part of the country, not only those studying, but also a large number of families who were visiting them, and a lot of them families had been there numerous times. You know, it has been mentioned about, you know, what's known as the brain drain, and a lot of people who go to universities, actually there's a high percentage of those who stay there and set up the you know, their life and settle there. So is there has the panel any advice for us as councillors? You know, what do we need to do? What needs to be done in order to pursue this? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Donnelly. What I'm going to do just to the panel there is I'm going to bring in our next indicated speaker, and I'll let you answer, and then I have two more after that, just to get through them. So Councillor Harkin, you'd indicated next there.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me in, and thank you to all the presenters today. That was very, very useful. And I want to thank the Royal Irish Academy in particular for putting a very welcome spotlight on higher education provision here in Derry and in the Northwest. I don't know why that's echoing there. How's that? Is that better? It sounds better for me anyway. Yeah. I want to thank the Royal Irish Academy in particular for bringing a spotlight on higher education provision for Derry, the Northwest, and looking at education very much in an integrated way for right across the entire island, which I think is going to be the road we need to travel down. There is an article in today's Belfast Telegraph. I don't know if people got to see it. It's in the business section, but it's about a new student accommodation block that's being built in an area of the city, and it was going to be offices, but now because there's a huge increase in student numbers because of the new Ulster University campus, they've changed it. The developers have changed it from offices to student units, and it's 600 rooms, and it's providing 350 construction jobs, and there's thousands and thousands of new student rooms being built all all around the city. And I think you can really see there how education itself is what young people need, and but it also shows how it can actually help with employment and allow a city to flourish, and that's what we desperately need here in Derry, and that's why there is so much discussion about university and higher education provision here in the city. So I think that much of what you laid out in terms of the direction of education is where we need to go. But I do have a question, because the elephant for us is the role of Ulster University. I think for us, for decades and decades, Ulster University hasn't been a great partner for the council, for Derry and for the Northwest. And even in terms of what we're on track to now, even though there's a government agreement for 10,000 students at a minimum, that is not in the development plans of Ulster University. So in terms of the proposal that you're laying out here, is this something that you see Ulster University at the centre of, or do you see us having to go in a different direction? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harkin. I'm just going to pass back to the panel there for those questions, and then Councillor Tierney, you'll be coming on after, okay?
Okay, well, maybe I could speak first. You can hear me. I mean, you're asking what the council can do. I think what it can do and needs to do and is continue to lobby and make considerable noise in relation to these issues and push them very hard, both with the UK government, the Northern Ireland Executive, the departments in Belfast, but also with the Irish government, etc. And it requires enormous resilience and consistency in approach. And I would also add that we made the point that it's not just higher education that is a panacea for the Northwest. You need the associated infrastructure that goes with that in terms of road and rail and communications. I mean, I spent some time in the United States, and I actually did a study of what caused regions to be particularly productive and helpful and successful. And it was all of these things, the extent to which there was good road, rail, other communications were a factor in, for example, inward investment to a particular region. But you mentioned the issue of, for example, the development Belfast of what was to be an office block is now going to be student accommodation. And you will have seen in the slide there, it talks about one of the slides that we presented, not just government departments and the government, but also the financial capital and developers tend to be based in capital cities, and they have enormous lobbying power. And that undoubtedly has been a factor in the concentration of resources in Belfast, and that needs to be tackled and is an important issue. But the fact is that there was a promise in relation to student numbers for the Northwest, and it's I think up to you and other politicians and civic society to insist that that is honoured.
Can I just say a few words in following on from what Jerry has said in answer to some of these questions? First of all, to echo a point that Jerry has just made, councils shouldn't, and I'm sure they don't, underestimate their own particular influence. After all, they are institutions that are very close to the people. They're institutions that represent the people and are in a position, as they've demonstrated, indeed, throughout all of the Troubles, the local councils were persistent and consistent in staying together and pushing the case for local development. And therefore, I think that the council should continue their lobbying capacity with government in order to promote the further and higher education needs of the region. And the reason, of course, that we have proposed, along with the Royal Irish Academy, the establishment of a planning committee or commission into further and higher education, which would focus on this region in particular, is in order to give an opportunity to people to come into the planning process for the future needs in further and higher education.
Can I follow on those comments? As I'm Professor of Regional Development, and I think there is a certain danger if the focus is entirely on, as it were, the supply side for higher education, and not also matching that by work that the councils can do through their economic development and cultural development programs on the demand side. So I do think it's quite important that we just don't, and the council just doesn't see it as we want more higher education. If not in parallel, you're trying to develop an economic development strategy across the border. But also, I think it is quite important to see this as part of a territorial development strategy for the border regions, as part of the discussions that are going on in the UK as a result of levelling up, but also within the EU. I would really endorse entirely what Jerry said. It's not just about higher education, it's all other aspects of infrastructure and the other funds that are available, huge funds available in the structural funds from the EU. The British government is working on what it can do with levelling up funds and the residual levelling money they had from Europe. It's called the Shared Prosperity Fund. So I would argue very strongly that you pitch the case for something in the Northwest as a pilot process for new ways of working between economic development and community development and higher education development, as a model for new ways of working, which could be exemplary across the world. So pitch your ambitions quite high in terms of saying, this is an area which is got global interest in it, from the US, attracting inward investment. So there's a real big opportunity. So set your vision and ambitions high and see this as a pilot project for a new way of working between both the economic and cultural development, as well as higher education. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Folks, I have a number of indicated speakers now at this stage. So Councillor Kearney, do you want to go ahead?
Yep, thank you, Chair. And on behalf of the SDLP group, can I thank the Royal Irish Academy and the Hume Foundation for their presentation and the research that they have done around higher education in the Northwest. I think whenever you are looking at higher education in the Northwest and how we've got to where we're at, you have to think about the past and how certain decisions were taken. And for us, when we are doing that, I think it's very important that we do have the contribution from the John and Pat Hume Foundation, two people who, in my opinion, were very involved in the campaign over decades to see proper university provision in the Northwest. There's a lot of what is in the presentation and was presented by Professor McKenna and Professor Goddard that they're very much pushing, in my opinion, at an open door. We fully understand the deficit that we have across the Northwest in terms of higher education places, and we have been working with stakeholders and colleagues right across the Northwest to try and rectify that. One very interesting slide that I was looking at whenever he was going over it, when Professor Goddard was talking about why geography matters in education planning. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, Chair, so forgive me, but he said people responsible for higher education think of its geography. And then there was another slide that Professor McKenna was presenting, and he said that 75% of higher education students in the North are based in Belfast. If ever there was two slides that matched together and matched up and paired up, in my opinion, those are it. Professor Goddard also said that trickling down doesn't work, and the trickling down approach doesn't work. And again, in my opinion, there's nowhere better than the Northwest to stand over that comment. We know of the difficulties that we have here in attracting investment, and attracting employment and attracting good quality jobs for people. And I believe that with a properly funded and properly sized university provision here, that would hopefully rectify itself. Professor McKenna also talked about a number of the deficits that we have here in terms of innovation and infrastructure. And when you pair that with the deficit that we have around higher education places, I think that's similar sides of the same coin, because when you fix one, the others will fall into place in very many ways. The conclusion of the research concluded that focus is required beyond major cities outside of Belfast and Dublin. And I think everyone in this council and across the Northwest would agree with that statement and have agreed with it for quite a long time. So it begs the question, what do we do about it, or how can we try to address it? And again, in the conclusion, it said that an independent and coordinated territorial education planning body focused on the Northwest. So how do we get there? I believe that we have the links across the Northwest with the establishment of the Northwest Strategic Growth Partnership and the work that that has been doing. We now need to see this presentation, in my opinion, being moved into that space. And I understand and I know that there's a meeting of that body scheduled in for the end of February, where I understand that both governments, both councils and both universities will be present. And I would like to see this presentation being delivered at that meeting, where we could then hopefully be looking down the road at getting commitment from both governments, both councils and both universities at looking at that independent, coordinated territorial education planning body for the Northwest. And then hopefully we could start to build gaps. I think a lot of the presentation in many ways is the business case for higher and improved university provision in the Northwest. But it can't just end here today with a very, very important presentation. We have to see how we move it forward. And I would suggest to officers that an invitation is sent to both the Royal Irish Academy and the Hume Foundation to present at the next meeting of the Northwest Strategic Growth Partnership, where all of those bodies will be there, where they can then take this forward and see if we can build on the very important and very informative piece of research that both bodies have been involved in. And I'll make that as a proposal if you need it, Chair. But just thank you very much to both the Royal Irish Academy and the Hume Foundation for the work that they've done, for their presentation here today. And hopefully by building links with our partners across the Northwest, we'll be able to rely on your research and your support to hopefully try and fix a number of the deficits that we face here in the Northwest. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney. And if needs be, if that's a proposal, I'm happy to second that an invitation is sent for that strategic partnership meeting. The next indicated speaker is Councillor John McGowan.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me on. And I want to thank Professor McKenna and Professor Goddard as well for their presentation today. There's been a lot of talk today about the past, but I would like to talk about the future. It's obvious that previous ministers for FE and DFE have failed to prioritise the university growth in this city. That goes without saying. You could go as far back as 20 years or more on Stormont, and you won't find a minister on the record trying to expand university provision in Derry. This is probably why Belfast, in your figure, is at 75% of student numbers. Sinn Féin will prioritise Derry. We've made it no secret of our desire to take the DFE ministry, and we won't be found wanting on this. So I suppose, you know, we don't disagree with anything that you say today, but one of the things that we will do is set up an immediate task force to deliver the student numbers to the city. And we've said that. And one of the things we will be doing is taking this presentation and letting them see that. We all know what an expanded university will do. That argument has been made by many others before us today. It brings jobs and investment. It brings employers because they follow where the students are. And it's probably the single biggest thing we can do in the city to grow not only the rate space, but to grow employment and jobs and expand the city. And that's not lost on us either. We need to keep our young people here. And I take your point about the number of young people that could fill a uni that's leaving. And that's something we recognise as a party, keeping our young people on this island, because as we've all come out of COVID and we've moved on to another crisis, we recognise the importance of skilled young people. And economies now can find people, so we certainly shouldn't be exporting people, and that's what we're doing at the minute. There's already a number of structures as well in place. I should mention that. We already have the Northwest Regional Development Group. We have the Northwest Strategic Group as well, and the Strategic Partnership. And Council, I have to say, leads on a lot of these. And many of them are already working on cross-border issues. So I think we've got to take context of that as well. There's already a lot being done by John Kilby and his team over the last number of years. And I think, they're already looking at a lot of the issues that you have mentioned today. And it's not all bad news, because, I know this Friday, the Atlantic Futures launch is happening in the Guildhall. That's €4 million of research being done by universities here. And some of the ones that you've mentioned today, we need to do more of that. So I don't disagree with anything that you say. I think we're in an ideal position. Many others will try and pull us out of Europe completely. Sinn Féin as a party, we would nearly like Protocol Part 2, which brings university funding back into play, which puts us back on the horizon, which allows us to participate fully in Erasmus and things like that. So you're not going to find any shut doors from our political party on that. We recognise our unique position on this island and within Europe, and that is why, if we take the FE, we'll do everything that we can on day one to ensure that 75% falls and that the provision of places in Derry increases. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McGuigan. My next indicated speaker is Alderman Devaney.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me in, and on behalf of the DUP, just can I welcome the delegation along here today, and I've listened contently to the presentation. This presentation, you know what it does? It really reinforces and supports our council area, our council that we have been crying for, even in the old council, and continue to raise the issues in the new council since it was formed, and around the lack of investment in our education in the Northwest. And look, I do agree with many other speakers that if we had the right specifics and around investment in the city, it enhances everything else, investment and jobs and stuff like that. But I do agree that with many other speakers, we are losing many of our top students to the UK, Australia, Canada, America, and other places. And as someone said earlier on, it is the brain drain. And look, I believe 75, maybe 80% of those never come back again. If they leave the Northwest, where they go, they settle down, they get married and have families, or whatever the case may be, and they don't come back. And I think that's an element that we are losing out. The argument on around Belfast having a stronger voice, I do agree with the debate on around that, because they are a capital city, and I think it's quite, we would know from our end here in the Northwest that they seem to be, on the toss of a coin, they seem to get the right call every time, which is unfortunate for us in the Northwest. But in around the whole issue, around, as we move forward, look, I have no problem. Our party will continue to argue for more investment for education in the Northwest, and continue to argue for more investment in our rails and roads, which is important to attract students to the Northwest, whether that be in Strabane, Omagh, or here in Londonderry. It makes no difference. We need that right infrastructure there. And yes, as some of the previous councillors have said, we need the right skilled people to move our council area, move forward, to attract that skill. And many of the time I would speak to businesses, and they would say to you that we cannot find the skill set that we need for our businesses. And I believe that's where we need to step up and encourage more investment in the Northwest to plug that gap, and to encourage more people, when they are educated in the Northwest or across Northern, that they stay there. But once again, look, thank you for the presentation, and well done.
Thank you, Alderman Devaney. I have two further indicated speakers, and then I'm going to pass over to the panel then for closing remarks. Alderman Hussey.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentations. To the second speaker, I'm going to reprimand you slightly because you're about to suffer the revenge of places that apparently don't matter. This is not a city council, this is a district council, as I constantly remind all of my colleagues. And the collaborative work, as Councillor Tierney has indicated there, you're pushing at an open door. A lot of that collaborative work is already underway through UU, through Northwest College, and indeed through Letterkenny and ATU. Recently, Northwest Region Development Group, we had the presentation from American students as to the overall atlas of the Northwest and how it transcends the actual borders for mutual benefit. And it's very welcome that what is being suggested with regard in the academic field is mirroring that, and very, very welcome. One of the elements that we have to be aware of course, is that our third level institutions are competitive. And I know this through my own brother as we talked in terms of developing medical study in the Northwest through UU. My brother, who's now retired, was Dean of Dentistry at QUB, and we had some very interesting conversations as to the competitive nature between QUB and UU, and within the overall development of the medical facilities, but that is progressing, thank goodness. Sometimes I wonder about the commitment of UU to the Northwest, to the city, vis-a-vis their commitment to their Belfast campus. You talk in terms of the greater Northwest, and I hope it's not just lip service to the Southwest College and to CAFRA. The part of the council area that I represent is in the southern part, and a lot of our young people their studies would be in the OMA and Enniskillen campuses of the Southwest College, or indeed CAFRA, as we're a rural area. I suppose the basic question would be, what engagement, or has there been any engagement with the institutions themselves yet? Because the thing that would worry me is the competitive nature that does exist between what are autonomous educational bodies. But thank you for the presentation, and it can only augur well if people can cooperate within the entire Northwest area, right through ATU and its span into our own area here in Derry City and Strabane District Council area. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Hussey. And my final indicated speaker is Councillor Raymond Barr.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Jerry, John and Sean for a very informative presentation. Some of the statistics are alarming, but at the same time, we can see that the potential for strong, healthy structures in education within the whole island is enormous. The world's changing, this island is changing, and if we don't adapt to that change, we get left behind. I believe that the social and economic challenges we're now facing on the island of Ireland presents an opportunity for everyone to progress in a positive manner, and key to that progress is education. I just feel it's an opportunity not to be missed. So thank you again, gentlemen.
Thank you, Councillor Barr. So I'm going to pass back to yourselves on our panel today. If there's any questions there that you are able to answer, any closing remarks you'd like to make, go ahead.
Well, just to say, first of all, thank you, and thank you for the very informative input that we've had from the councillors, and that's helpful to us as we reflect as well. And we're certainly willing to participate and help in any way we can in moving things forward, and we will have our own agenda. I suppose the important thing to say is something I said at the outset: the Royal Irish Academy is independent, and that I think is very important, in the sense that whilst we of course support all the higher education and other institutions, we take an independent view of things. We can sit back and look at things, and we don't have to wait until particular institutions ask us to do something or whatever, we will actually look at things that need to be dealt with, and we'll deal with them as we've done in relation to the Higher Education Task Force. And I think this comes to this point about oversight. And whilst I commend the efforts of the existing institutions in terms of what they've been doing in higher education and developments, but that does not, I think, obviate the need for some oversight and some degree of over control of these activities, and indeed chivying them to do things that they mightn't necessarily want to do at a particular time. And that's where I think that oversight body is extremely important. I think if there had been, for example, effective oversight of higher education in Northern Ireland, we would not have 75% plus of higher education students located in Belfast. The regional dimension would have been more fully looked at. It may be in institutional interests to concentrate students. It may be easier in financial terms to do certain things, but I think there is that need for oversight, and that's where that independence, I think, is extremely important, where people can sit and look and say, how should Northern Ireland look? How should the Northwest region look? And what does it require in the future? And bearing in mind what exists currently, what should be done in terms of moving that forward and developing that in a cooperative, collaborative way, which I think would be to the benefit actually of all the institutions, but most definitely would be to the benefit of the region.
As Chair, can I just add a few words to what Professor McKenna has just said? First of all, my thanks on behalf of the Hume Foundation again for allowing us to come and make our presentation this afternoon. Can I say that the Hume Foundation intends to continue with its interest and commitment to this issue, and in particular, what we would like to see is the mobilization of the various stakeholders that would have an interest in the further and higher education developments across the region, mobilizing them on a cross-border basis. I think that there is an opportunity now to create, as John Goddard outlined in his comments, a unique institution at third level, one that straddles the border, draws on the strengths of the institutions on both sides of the border, and becomes a model for many advanced forms of North-South collaboration. So I want to thank the committee members who have spoken and commented on our presentations, and assure them that we will continue with this issue and hopefully meet again in various formats as we push this issue to the forefront. Thank you.
Can I close by giving my thanks to the contributions? There were some very thoughtful reflections which I'd like to come back to. I would highlight the point that was made by one of the councillors about thinking about the future. You know, and we are facing a different world as a result of digital technology, all of the global crises, and somehow thinking about this as what do we want to achieve. And if you look at the an indication of what's happening to cities and regions around the world, there is a real focus on smaller and medium-sized places acting as more attractive living environments where people want to work together. Creativity and innovation, entrepreneurs are all going to exciting and developing places. And I think the Derry City region, I visited, I spoke at that conference, and I was only briefly there. As a buzzing city, I think it has a real opportunity for doing something really quite distinctive as a counter magnet. And the other thing that I would emphasize is this whole point of collaboration between different universities. You've talked about Queen's University and Ulster University. What's happening in England is after the Civic University Commission, and that's why I'm very keen. It's an independent commission in the UK, and like the Royal Irish Academy, it's independent. But what is encouraged, partnerships between universities in individual cities for example, the Research Intensive University, my university, Newcastle University, and the former Polytechnic are now collaborating in a civic university agreement, which is helping to serve the wider region. So it does seem to me there is a lot to be learned by looking at an initiative that you're talking about in what can we learn from what's going elsewhere, mobilizing the intellectual strengths of both universities who are under pressure to be doing good to their communities. And so I would think you should be talking both at Queen's University and Ulster University about the challenges that they could make to the development of the peace dividend across the border of Ireland, and working in collaboration with all the institutions that are in Jerry's slides. So I think you have a real exciting opportunity for some global positioning here, and I'm delighted to continue to help you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Jerry, John, Sean, and the other representatives from the Royal Irish Academy and the Hume Foundation who were at this meeting today. It was a very informative presentation and discussion afterwards with the members of this committee, and we'll look forward to working with you moving forward to develop the further and higher education for the Greater Northwest region. At this point, we are going to move on to the rest of our business for this meeting. If you want to stay, you can, or it's broadcast live on YouTube.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that brings us on to item 5, which is chairperson's business, and I have 3 items under this part of the meeting. Firstly, myself, I wanted to raise the meeting that we had, the public meeting that was called last week in support of Radio Foyle. I have a proposal that I had sent to the committee section. If I could get that put on the screen for members, that would be great. I'd like to take this opportunity to commend the National Union of Journalists, the Dairy Trade Union Council and the Mayor for facilitating the public meeting that was held and was really well attended from across various trade unions, all political parties I think were represented there, and different sections of our community right across the city, district and indeed further afield. Coming out of that meeting, there's a very active campaign that's highlighting the impact of these proposed cuts and what they mean for people across the city district and again further afield. Personally, I think it's ridiculous that the BBC are finding cuts to local programming to the tune of £420,000 when over the past number of years they spent £7 million rebranding logos. Out of the licence fee, there's only it's £159 a year. Only £7.60 of that is actually dedicated to local programming. So, but still, the BBC thinks that this is the first place where cuts should be imposed. To me, is a disgrace, and worse still, it's without any public consultation. I also note that following last month's meeting, a proposal that was brought forward to write to Adam Smith, we haven't received a response yet to my knowledge, which is why I think we need to be writing to everybody else that's there as well. So Tim Davey, who is the Director General of the BBC, and Rhodri Davies, who's the Director of Nations for the BBC, to outline the concerns of the impacts that these cuts are going to have. I think we need to be encouraging local people, our constituents, us all as public representatives, to write to those representatives as well as the council, to get behind the social media campaign using the hashtag Save Radio Foyle and support the station as much as we can. So that's my proposal. I hope I have 3 seconds. So it's seconded, and I've got a couple of people now that are going to come in. Councillor Harkin, you had indicated first, and then Councillor Jackson, and then Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Chair, and fully endorse your proposal. I think it's absolutely right that we continue to advocate and campaign in support of BBC Radio Foyle. I think we should not only write to Tim Davey and Rhodri Davies, I think we should also invite them to come here and hear directly from all the parties and the independents, because one thing that we can say with certainty is that there's massive and broad support to protect and save Radio Foyle, and I would hope we could actually extend it, and we want to be able to make that case to, the people who run the BBC. So fully support that. And hope everybody backs it. I think it's disgraceful that we haven't heard yet from Adam Smith, and we should double down on our efforts to bring him here. I think it is shocking, given the response of the people here in Derry and right across the Foyle area to the proposed cuts, that he hasn't even responded yet to the council. I mean, this is shocking from somebody who oversees a very important institution in the north. Thank you again for your proposal.
Sir Jackson.
Good Chair, and we fully support the proposal. We're content they seconded, but Alderman Hussey get on for us. But and again, I would echo the comments of Councillor Harkin. It's extremely disappointing, but not surprising that we haven't heard back from Adam Smith. It just shows the blatant disregard for the views of this council area and I suppose the Foyle catchment area. The meeting that was hosted on the 4th of January was very well attended, and the contributions from the floor were absolutely fantastic. We heard firsthand from those employees that are directly affected by the proposed cuts, those that provide that valuable service within Radio Foyle, and the wider NUJ family. The Radio Foyle, which is well demonstrated within this council, is a fabric of the local area, and we will continue to stand and fight against any proposed cuts. One of the things that was highlighted at that meeting was the fact that there isn't any member on the BBC Council that represents this part of the world because of the lack of a functioning executive, and that's deeply frustrating. So it shows that these proposed cuts have been taken without any contribution or any thought from local people here, and that sort of demonstrates the need for some sort of consultation. For the BBC, they propose cuts to this extent, impacting local services without any consultation in a time when there's a political vacuum, where there isn't any appointments to the BBC board couldn't be made, is disgraceful. So again, if there's any avenue that we can take as a corporate body, we as a party, we would be fully supportive of it. But again, reiterating the call that we all as individuals should be doing whatever we can as well to highlight this cause and continue to take a stand against these proposed devastating cuts to local services. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair. And we'll have no issue supporting the proposal. I think the original suggestion was to write to Adam Smith and invite him here, and I would agree with Councillor Harkin in terms of extending an invitation to that meeting item with this proposal as well, because it's not okay to take these decisions in Belfast or London and sit there then and hide from the people and the particular area which is going to be most impacted by them. I and colleagues attended the meeting in the Guildhall at the beginning of January, and I have to say it was one of the most passionate meetings that I've attended in this place, and we attend quite a number in here. But the level of commitment by community workers, by elected reps, by trade unionists, all to try and save Radio Foyle, I think was very heartening. One thing that I was shocked at whenever this news broke, believe it or not, is that Radio Foyle has only been broadcasting just over 40 years. Now, to some people that might have been obvious, but to me it wasn't. And I think there's a wider story in that, because people of my age and my generation can't imagine Derry without Radio Foil. And if we don't take steps like this, that's what's going to happen. And I think it's important that as a council, we are seen to be supporting the saving of the station, but also the saving of those jobs up there, because, and I'm sure that colleagues will agree with me, the journalists up there are so committed and dedicated to giving ordinary people across the Northwest a voice on big issues that are impacting on them. For example, I don't know how many times I've been on the breakfast programme recently about the cost of living crisis or about the hardship fund, the research and the work that they do. For that couple of minutes discussion in the morning, to get that information out to people, in my opinion, won't be matched by anybody. That's all building, and that should be all relayed in these letters and in these discussions, that this isn't just a radio station. This isn't just a breakfast programme. This is an outlay or an output for people across the Northwest, and it's so important to the fabric of the Northwest. And we, as a party and hope as a council, commit to doing all we can to supporting and doing all we can to save Radio Foil and to save these jobs. So we're only too happy to support your proposal, but we would maybe consider sending an invitation to get them here. I would prefer not a WebEx invitation. I would rather see the whites of their eyes in this building as opposed to a WebEx invitation. But if we would prefer to see an invitation. Thank you.
Well, I'll take that as an amendment that's proposed and seconded, essentially, that we, I know, Sean, you had sort of proposed there to amend it to include an invitation.
I'm not a member of this committee.
You're not a member of this committee. Well, you proposed it and I'll second it. I'll second it. Forgiving myself, sorry, Sean. So to amend that, to include an invitation to the directors of the BBC to this committee, so we can express those concerns. Alderman Devaney.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me in, and on behalf of the DUP, we have no problem in supporting the proposal going forward here, and totally opposed to the cuts that are proposed here for our local radio station, Radio Foil, here in the Northwest and in the city. You know, this station does deliver, you know, a very committed and value service, you know, raising the issues and around local issues and news and events that are going on within the city. I do believe it's wrong, but just to finish, Chair, no problem in supporting the proposal and the amendment as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Devaney. Alderman Hussey.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for bringing this to the attention of committee. Totally endorse the situation. I noticed Councillor Tierney looked round at me when he was talking about 40 years ago. I suppose I remember Radio Luxembourg and Radio Caroline and things like that. I did say at the meeting, you know, one of the first things you do in a coup d'etat is you chop the radio station or you take over the radio station. So it's vitally important, even in the context of our previous discussion, that we fight to maintain local radio, and indeed, as was suggested at the meeting, it would be preferable, rather than curtailing Radio Foil, that the extent of its coverage was extended. I live in an area where you just sit between Radio Foil and Radio Ulster, and if you're driving about 1 minute, you're listening to Radio Foil and it switches, which is very annoying, especially when a story comes up that you're very interested in, of local interest to our Northwest area. So totally endorse and support the invitation. Can I also express my disappointment at the lack of response from Adam Smith? I think it's despicable that the man couldn't even write back and acknowledge the invitation to come to this council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, members. That's everyone who indicated they speak on this, and it's been proposed, seconded, as has the amendment. So that proposal will move forward. Thank you. And thank you, folks. The second item that I have under Chairperson's business is from Alderman Devaney in relation to some issues in the fountain.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me in. And as I've informed you, it's in relation to an issue in the fountain and around the Mugga pitch. For the last, even last winter and up until today at lunchtime, the lights are working, but there is a problem getting the code since the refurbishment of the building. And I've been in contact with officers on Thursday, and I do know there was contact made today by email by one officer, and it was to discuss management. And look, Chair, this is not about management or even a maintenance issue, because that is 100%. It's just about getting the code sorted out, whatever has happened to code. And given in light, Chair, what has happened in the fountain over the weekend, the attack on the family home there, and it has heightened tensions in there. And I think this should be given a priority. That this code issue should be sorted out, and and I would just like to, at the end of, condemn the attack on that family in the fountain. I think it was reckless, has to be condemned by everyone. But I do, once again, I would ask, look, if there's any possibility of a bit of priority and around getting this in light to what has happened and at the weekend. And thank you very much, Chair, for allowing me in on this. I know it doesn't fit within this committee, probably sits ENR, but I think the importance of the issue to get the Mugga pitch up and running again for the young people of the fountain to be able to use the facility again would be helpful at this time. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Devaney. And John has said they will pick that up and get it actioned. And I think the condemnation of the attack on the fountain has been condemned across the board by all parties, and rightly so. It was wrong and shouldn't have happened. So our third item of chairperson's business is Christopher Jackson. And Sean, you had indicated you wanted to speak on this as well. So.
Yeah, Mayor, and I just wanted to come on to offer our condolences following the passing of Charlie Kelly. Charlie sadly passed away on Friday, and Charlie, I would know Charlie as a native of Topple Hill, and the entire community is deeply saddened by his loss. There's many family and friends that live in the area, but Charlie's been better known through his role in the postal service and his work within his role within the Communications Workers Union, standing up for the rights of our postal service, and our postal service certainly came out in strength today at his funeral. They gave him a fitting send-off. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to send our council's condolences to Charlie's family. We all know that our postal service are in the middle of industrial action. They're all standing very strong at the picket line, and I know it's something that Charlie is very passionate about, and what the strength of unity within our postal service certainly shows a lasting legacy of Charlie Kelly. So I just wanted to raise this as a committee and ask for us as a council to send our condolences to his family. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Harkin.
Thank you, Chair, for letting us in. And we also wanted to send our sincere condolences to Charlie's family, his friends and work colleagues, and his trade union colleagues as well. Charlie worked for the Postal Service for 31 years, and he was a trade union delegate, the CWU representative for Derry, and for his branch for 25 years. And as he said, when he was retiring a year ago, he says, in those 25 years, he was backed by the workers there through thick and thin. And I think he was a fantastic representative, and his work colleagues promised him a huge send-off today, and they very much did that. It was powerful to see what they did from his home right to the cemetery. And if it's okay, I'm just going to read out quickly the message that the Trades Council sent, because I think it speaks to the appreciation of Charlie. The Derry Trades Union Council would like to send a message of solidarity to the family of Charlie Kelly and his trade union colleagues in the CWU. Charlie Kelly was a formidable and trustworthy trade union representative, someone of whom you would have been fortunate to have had on your side at work and have been able to call upon if the need arose. Definitely one of a kind, someone who will be greatly missed by his work colleagues in the dairy delivery office, where he operated as a CWIR representative, a huge loss to the trade union movement. Charlie Kelly's colleagues in the CWU will be giving him a fitting send-off, and he did. A no-nonsense, straight talker who got stuff done. Solidarity. Rest in power, Charlie Kelly.
Thank you, Councillor Hirkin. Councillor Donnelly.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, look, I was just looking to come in after Alderman Devaney regarding the sectarian attack on the fountain, just to put on record that you know, it's absolutely wrong. I know the individual, you know, who was targeted. I don't think he was targeted deliberately, and whilst we disagree politically, it's absolutely wrong for a family home or for him to be attacked in this way. I also want to send condolences and solidarity to the family and colleagues, trade union family regarding Charlie Kelly, and also the family and colleagues of Dermy McClanahan. These are huge losses to the dairy community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Donnelly. Councillor Minnie.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come on the back of fellow members there, I don't think we could do any better than the tribute read out by Councillor Hargan in the memory of Mr. Kelly. But just to say that I would like to extend our condolences on behalf of the SLP to the family of late Mr. Kelly. And just to say that I had contact with Mr. Kelly in our own capacity as councillors during the COVID crisis, and amongst just during through his own capacity as a postman and what they were working through during that time. And but on behalf of the SLP, and we would like to extend our condolences to the family, and thank you to Christopher and everybody who spoke on us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Minnie, and from this committee, our condolences to Charlie's family, friends and comrades within the trade union movement. Moving on, that concludes Chairperson's business. So we'll be moving forward now to item 7, which is the matters arising from the open minutes of the Governance and Strategic Planning Committee, which was held on Tuesday, the 29th of November. Alderman Hussey.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 items. Page 31. I haven't got my glasses with me. Let's get it again. 190, the Working Group on Irish Unity. Chief Executive added these costs would be quantified as requested. Have those costs been quantified yet?
Yes, they have.
Can they be made available?
Yeah. Well, obviously they're internal costs. So what we've done, Ellen can come in the detail of this, but what we've done is we've attempted to place a cost in this based on the potential, in private sector terms, the charge out rates, if you like, of senior officers who've been working on the project. They're approximately £5,000 at this juncture in terms of what has been notionally expended. But of course, there hasn't been any actual expenditure.
Appreciate that, Chair. My second query is page 41, 195, 22, the Energy Fuel Support Programme. I don't know if council officers have become aware, but there has been an extreme concern at the attitude of some of the companies who have been brought on board to deliver this scheme. Now, I know Una isn't here, and perhaps she would have the full detail on it, but there's certainly a concern, and I've heard it expressed from others who are other councillors who have their concerns at how companies in particular, it's not so much council, but it's the procurement of those particular companies and the way that they have treated some people. It's been reported within my own dairy area. Maybe it's different there than it has been in the city. But, you know, that where for the £100, people receiving 80 litres of fuel or being asked to pay extra to bring it up to the 100 litres, etc. it is a concern, and I think it has to be addressed by council. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Harkin, are you looking on the same item?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, I think what Alderman Hussey is raising is very, very important. And I know that Councillor Tierney was on the radio earlier this week discussing frustrations that people have with the payment, the fact that it's been delayed. And there is a council hardship fund working group meeting tomorrow at noon. And I would encourage people with any concerns or issues to try and feed it into that meeting so we can try to get a full understanding and picture of the issues that are leading people to be frustrated and confused. And I think we'll have to address all of this stuff as quickly as possible, including how people have been treated by some of the companies that are involved in the scheme.
Councillor Donnelly's on the same item, and then Councillor Heaney.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, look, I received a phone call today from a man whose mother had applied and successfully was accepted for the £100. When she phoned the oil company, they wanted £18.50 on top of the £100 to call out. Now I did contact Una, and Una had asked me to relay the message that for the people concerned, they send their details in, and they would get it switched rather from a Belfast firm to a local firm, and that would overcome that problem of the additional £18.50. But I think Councillor Harkin's right. I think it's important that people attend the meeting tomorrow, and that any information that they have or any hiccups or problems, that it's fed into that, so that these lessons are learned from. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Heaney.
Thanks, Chair. Well, this was actually the item that I had indicated earlier that I wanted to come on just under matters of reason. And I take the point that there is a meeting tomorrow of the working group, but I was hoping to get an update at this meeting in relation to progress. We were talking about radio foil earlier, and I listened to a ratepayer on who is eligible for the scheme but still hadn't received it. So there's obviously still issues that are going on, and not least the ones that has been raised by Councillor Hussey and Councillor Harkin also. So I don't know if we can hear from council officers at this meeting as well, just because, we'd hope to be at the working group, but not all of us may be able to make it.
Unfortunately, the senior officer who's leading on it, and McGillian, is actually working on this at the moment. So she has called the meeting tomorrow in response to a number of members' requests. So hopefully the majority of the issues can be raised and dealt with at tomorrow's hardship working group meeting.
John, Councillor Heaney.
Thank you. And I suppose just to agree with others around some of the difficulties that people have experienced over the Christmas period, trying to get access to the vouchers and one thing and another. I think it shows the delicacy of council running such a scheme and the difficulties that we have come up against, from the very outset around this scheme. The purpose of this was to get, from our point of view, and I hope from others as well, was to get this money out to people as quickly as we could. They offer that support. But there are, and there have been difficulties. I've been dealing with one today, and I do have to say that whenever you forward one on to another, they're resolved pretty quickly. But that shouldn't be the case. They shouldn't need to be forwarded on. But I do have to credit her. Whenever you do, they are sorted out pretty quickly. Hopefully at tomorrow's meeting we'll find out how many more are waiting for payment and waiting to get the vouchers to them, or how quickly we can see those being rolled out. Hopefully there's not many left. And I would like to see us very quickly moving into the review process of this scheme and seeing, why these difficulties happened, why we didn't foresee them at the time, what we would do differently, and looking at the review process, because I think with any new scheme, it's incredibly important that we do review it because so many people have been impacted by it. And, you know, I've spoken to people who told me that they almost felt like they were begging for the £100. That's not what this scheme was about. It was about trying to get support out to people. But if it infringes on people's dignity, you know, that's not where we wanted to go. So from our point of view, we'll be attending the meeting tomorrow. We want to see how quickly we can move on to that review stage of this scheme and find out what technically went wrong and how we could improve on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney. And as I say, that meeting is tomorrow, so I'd encourage everybody to go and report those issues in so they can be quantified as part of that review process. It's important. So that's all the speakers on that item. Is there any other matters arising from the minutes of last month's meeting? Give it a wee second.
See, just on that, and bear with me because I'm trying to get this iPad open. It's on that fuel. It's more from the minutes. GSP 19522.
Yep.
It says that I had asked officers guidance regarding a request from Derry Against Fuel Poverty. That's not correct. There was no request from them. It was I was making my way to the meeting and seeing that they were outside and wanted to come on. So that's just technically not accurate.
Well, we can get that amended before they're I think they were ratified already. They've been ratified already, full council in December.
Chair, they have been ratified, but we can make a note in today's minutes that you've raised that issue.
Yep, yeah. Perfect. That's great. Anything else anybody wants to raise before we move on? No. Okay. So that moves us to item 8, which is the strategic rail report, pages 49 to 70. And I'm going to pass over to John and Rachel, who are going to take us through that report.
Okay, thank you, Chair. A very comprehensive report that the Strategic Business Manager, Rachel Craig, has compiled, and also members, the Director of Environment and Regeneration apologises that she can't be at today's meeting. So this, I'm not proposing to go through this report in detail. It was brought to the last rail working group and it was discussed at great length. But I think just a couple of points to note. It ties in very clearly with the deputation's comments about council continuously putting itself in a position where it's lobbying for the infrastructure deficit, never mind the HE deficit in the city and district council area, but also the wider northwest. And certainly through the work of the rail working group over the last year, council on every single occasion through multiple channels has been lobbying very, very hard to address this infrastructure deficit, in particular with regard to rail. It's been done through revisions to the strategic growth plan. It's been done at northwest level through the strategic growth partnership. There's representation being made in terms of the regional strategic transport network planning through the northwest transport plan. Very substantive response that this committee would have endorsed in relation to the strategic rail review. And we very much look forward to seeing the outcome of the strategic rail review, which latest information we've been provided through the Northwest Strategic Growth Partnership at its meeting in December should come forward in the next month or two. And we are led to believe that there has been a very substantive response, not just our own, from the Northwest. So we hope to see some positive news coming out of that. We've made representations in the investment strategy for Northern Ireland. We've held a very significant Rail Ambition seminar. And when the Taoiseach visited the Guildhall through the Northwest Regional Development Group, we also included rail very strongly in the list of priorities of the Northwest during that meeting. There is a section 3.18 to 3.21 of the report deals with a subsequent council motion on the Clanmill development, protection of rail corridors. The response from TransLink in relation to that, i.e. that one of the very important issues that we need dealt with as soon as possible is to protect a corridor for the future of rail development, direct rail provision from the city through Strabane and Omagh connecting down into Dublin. And there is an indication, and again, this ties back into the All Island Strategic Rail Review, there is an indication that that may be prioritised. Indeed, the outgoing Minister for Infrastructure signalled, pardon the pun, but signalled that this feasibility study needed to be prioritised. So we hope to hear some positive news with respect to that. We've also outlined in the report the discussions that have been held with Clanmill and their response with regard to the value of the site. But the key issue here, members, is the establishment, the undertaking of a feasibility study and the subsequent establishment of a protected corridor to ensure that future development does not take place. We've outlined other slightly more operational activities that the council has been undertaking with regard to rail issues over the last year. There have, and we finish on a fairly substantive and very positive meeting we held as officers with Into the West lobby group just before Christmas, essentially comparing notes, working through the various priorities, catching up on the activities of Into the West and briefing Into the West on the activities of council. And the proposal is, as members of the rail working group will know, that Into the West will be presenting into the next rail working group together with a number of other rail lobby groups on Friday the 24th of February. So members, the report's there before you. Hopefully you find it very comprehensive. Just wanted to ask Rachel if you wanted to add anything.
Just to update members that you'll recall there was a request at this committee that we invite TransLink in to discuss some of the ongoing correspondence that we've had back and forth. So Chris Conway has agreed to attend our next meeting. So that'll be covered off in addition to what John has said. As the Rail Working Group was meeting in November, and you'll find the minutes of that meeting attached at Appendix 1 for your information. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, John and Rachel, for that. My first indicated speaker on this is Councillor Jack.
Good Chair, and thanks to John and Rachel. I attended the last rail working group, and I found it very, very useful. It was a very productive meeting. In relation to the comments and the attitude from the officials from DFA and TransLink, it was very, very positive. I suppose when we look at infrastructure and we look at future transportation systems, rail is always going to be an integral part of how we move about, and I suppose it's been well rehearsed. It's been well demonstrated how the railway network has suffered as a result of partition. We've seen how the comparisons of the rail network prior to partition, the rail network now, it's stark, and as we're reversing the damage that's caused by partition, the investment into the rail network and restoring the tracks, improving connectivity has to be front and central to that. And in relation to the comments and from DFA and from TransLink, they're very much open to that. They seem committed to improving connectivity. They I suppose grow our rail network and improve services to the northwest. And I know there's John, you've alluded to the work that's been carried out over many years by Into the West. I know Into the West did a presentation to a partnership panel where they've highlighted the importance of the Northwest Rail Corridor, and and that was found. It generated a lot of discussion and interest from representatives from all the neighbouring council areas. So I'm pleased to hear that under the Western Council continue to maintain that good working relationship, and because if we are going to deliver on improved rail services, I think a partnership working with Under the West is important. I know we haven't always seen ADA. I can remember some of very difficult discussions we've had in terms of investing in the Northwest Transport Hub. But I'm delighted to see that as a result of the investment and in the facility and the waterside, we have seen the huge growth in rail use within between the Derry and Belfast line. So it shows that when the investment's made, people are ready to make that modal shift, and it fits clearly within our climate change agenda. So I think this report is very encouraging, and look forward to the future discussions with TransLink and Mr. Conway and in relation to what we can see and what we can do as a council to help assist the progression of the rail network in this part of the world. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you, Chair. Particularly as I'm not a member of this committee, but I just wanted to come in on this agenda item, and I think it's great to see, on paper within this report, just all the work that council are doing to lobby around proper rail investment for the Northwest region, because it will be an absolute game changer for the island. And the appetite is here within the council, and the appetite is absolutely there among ordinary people and the local community for a modern rail service that actually connects Derry to Dublin, to Donegal, to Sligo, and around the island, as well as an improved service to Belfast. And I think we just need to keep up this relentless work that we're doing in order to ensure that rail stays top of the agenda for DFI and within the All Ireland Rail Review actions. And hopefully by the next rail working group we'll have sight of the All Ireland Rail Review. And I think it's very positive that we're going to have Under the West and other rail lobby campaign groups join us for the next rail working group, because they have been relentless in their campaigns to ensure that we keep rail on the top of our agenda. I suppose I just want to ask about the Clanmill site, because they've put we've seen a price there now that the Clanmill have put on it, which is obviously, as we know, a whole lot more than what they bought the site for. But I'm not sure if these questions can't be answered, but who is it proposed that will buy this site? If, say, the All Ireland Rail Review specifies a reopening of the old Derry to Portadown railway line, will DFI have to step in to ensure that this old track bed is not built on? So who is it then that will provide the money to actually secure the site that will secure this rail route to connect Derry to Strabane, Lifford, and onwards. And I know that question might not be able to be answered, but I suppose, in the south there, we've seen massive investment in rail, and just recently there they've announced a €65 million contract was signed there for the Limerick to Foynes freight rail service. So that the south are starting to become serious about rail, even before the publication of the All Ireland Rail Review. And I think we need to see that same commitment from DFI, because obviously, our council is within has a financial crisis on our hands, and this was a decision that our council did actually, it's planning decision, our council did actually vote against. but it was the Plan and Appeals Committee that actually overturned it, despite the fact that the site was an old railway track bed. So if you can answer it, that would be great. Thanks.
Well, Chair, it's a very good question, and it's Councillor Neil, and it is a question that we have answered through, I think, previous papers under the committee. We've sought legal and professional advice on the matter, and you'll forgive me if I'm maybe not using the correct terminology, and we're very happy to come back just with a further clarification report on it. But the key issue in terms of the protection of potential future track beds is to ensure that any planning policy in relation to them is founded on sound feasibility studies, where government or the competent authority concludes that these are the routes of potential future railway lines. And on the basis of that information, we as a planning authority can then put in conditions and planning policies that protect those routes. And that's the place that we need to move to as quickly as possible, which links back to the need for the All-Island Strategic Rail Review, hopefully to conclude that a feasibility study such as this is going to take place and advance as soon as possible. I'm hoping that maybe answers your query. There's much more detail behind all of that we've incorporated in a previous report, and very happy to ensure that the detail of that is forwarded to you.
Thank you, John. Alderman Hussey.
Thank you, Chair, and I concur with the remarks of our previous speaker. Over 60 years ago, or close on 60 years ago, I should say, I sat doing my A-levels and watched the wrecking train pulling up the sleepers alongside my school in Omagh, along what is now called the Great Northern Road in Omagh. So the whole issue of identification of a route or the reinstatement of a line has to be taken on board. Not just protection, but identify the route. We know the difficulties that have been experienced on the A5 road. So we need to be identifying the route and protecting that route as we develop it. The sounds are coming forth are good with regard to a potential reinstatement of rail infrastructure, and it's something that will benefit the entire Northwest. Can I commend and thank Gracie for the report? And can I propose the recommendations that have been placed before committee? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Hussey. Councillor Minnie.
Well, thank you, Chair. I'm happy to second the recommendations so far. I've been on I've attended all of the rail working group presentations and workshops since it was brought on board, pardon the pun, in 2001. It's been a very interesting journey again, pardon the pun, and pardon me for making these puns, but they seem to be coming to my mind But no, I think there's been a lot of really hard work gone into this here rail working group as being seen, and obviously I'd like to pick up on Councillor Jackson's point as well, because of the aspect of partition and the lack of foresight that the previous Stormont administration to take the decision to decimate the rail lines back in the 50s and 60s, and again in Britain when we had the Beeching report, you had those decimations as well. And now what we're looking at now is we're looking for the re-emergence of rail again. And it was only 55 or 60 years ago when these tracks were lost, and we see now that the value that they have and the value that they should be bringing to our locality here. Because when we've spoken of the previous delegation about education, we're talking about the sort of symbiosis of you have the rail and infrastructure, you have education and infrastructure. If we had proper tracks and rail taking us from Derry from Coleraine, Derry, Letterkenny, Sligo, Galway, we would have a much greater regional balance here. But of course, these are all partnerships that we need to do. But so far, I'm extremely heartened by the work so far. But obviously, we have to acknowledge that it's probably is all contingent on the All Ireland Rail Review and the conclusion that brings, because that's probably the main actor in the room now in relation to the re-emergence or the movement in relation to rail in the northwest and to maybe the western part of Ireland as well. It's clear that this is going to be the main report, is to drive on rail. I'm glad to hear that obviously Translate are coming, and we should also note as well, and the SDLP would like to note as well, the immense work that Into the West has done. Steve Bradley, yourself and Councillor Tierney attended the meeting in Strabane just before Christmas. I remember we had Into the West in GSP in October 21. That was when Steve Bradley raised the spectre of Clonmel and what Clonmel could do to any future railway bridge leaving this town or leaving Derry City. Obviously, we need that track on the post development on the Victoria Road would be probably the main track line leaving Duke Street to presumably going to Strabane, Oma and linking up. London engineer, and I couldn't comment on any bespoke solutions, but the price that's been quoted for nearly £1.5 million has been raised by Councillor Neil is, where do we find that money? They set that aside. So, but I take heart and really take heart in what the officers' work have done so far, and hopefully we can move positively, moving on. But I think now we're just really waiting on to see the conclusions of the review. That is the main strategic document that we'll be working off to progress this. The re-innovation of rail in the northwest and in our city and district. But thank you to the officers and thank you to all our members and their contributions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Minnie, and the report has been proposed and seconded, and I don't have any other speakers looking to speak to it. So we will move on. I'm just conscious of the time. Members are happy enough. Do you want to go through or do you want to take a wee 10 minutes? Does anybody want to give me an indication? Because I can do either, I don't mind. Take a 5-minute break? Okay, we'll take 5 minutes. We'll come back at 20 past. That's us back online. So that brings us to item 9, which is Section 95 of the Local Government Act 2014, Improvement Audit and Assessment Report 2223. And I'm going to hand over to Ellen for that report.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to advise members of and seek your endorsement of the outcome of the improvement audit and assessment for the 22-23 year. As indicated in the report, we're under a duty to make arrangements to secure continuous improvement, and the local government auditor each year has to report on whether the council has discharged its duties. As outlined in the report, the audit and assessment was undertaken under 8 thematic areas, and I'm pleased to report that the local government auditor has certified the performance arrangements with an unqualified audit and confirms that the council has discharged its performance improvement and reporting duties. The report indicates that there was only no formal recommendations, but there was one proposal for improvement relating to the timing and production of directorate plans and consultation. So therefore, members, the recommendation before you today is that elected members consider and endorse the outcome of the audit carried out by the local government auditor. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Ellen. Councillor Money, are we looking on there?
You, Chair, I'd just like to say thank you to Ellen for preparing the report. I don't really have any questions, but I'm happy to propose the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Money. Would any other members like to? Councillor Alderman Hussey is happy to second. And does anyone wish to speak to the report just before we move on? No, enough. Okay, so we'll move on to item 10, which is the 6th monthly report, strategic planning and support units delivery plan, pages 101 to 124. And again, that's over to Ellen for this report.
Yes, again, the purpose of this report is to advise and seek members' comments and endorsement in relation to the progress against the Strategic Planning and Support Units Delivery Plan for 22-23. Again, this plan, as is highlighted in the report, was approved by this committee in April, and the documentation at Appendix 1 now highlights the progress made for the first 6 months of the 22-23 year, i.e. April to September. In overall terms, the report indicates that progress is 54% in terms of overall delivery, and therefore we're on track for delivery, and work is ongoing in terms of the rest of the completion of the activities and objectives identified. Again, in terms of the recommendation, it's subject to members' comments that the 6th monthly report for the Strategic Planning and Support Units Delivery Plan is endorsed. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Ellen. Would anyone like to speak to that or to propose or second it? Stage. Councillor Minnie.
Similar to the last agenda items, thank you, Chair, and thank you to Ellen. I'm happy to propose. I have no questions.
Thank you. So that's proposed. If I could get a seconder for the recommendations. Councillor Jackson. Thank you, and thank you, Ellen, and all the team for keeping us on track in terms of the moving forward for the rest of the year. Moving on then, we are at item 11, which is the report on the Commonwealth of Nations Flag of Peace, pages 125 to 138. And again, I'm going to hand over to Ellen for that.
Yes, through you, Chair, this report advises members of correspondence regarding the anniversary of the signing of the Charter of the Commonwealth and seeks endorsement for the recommendations in the report. As identified in the report, the main element of the initiative is the flying of the Commonwealth of Nations flag of peace. And it's also noted that legacy policies for both Derry City Council, Strabane District Council reflected that flags would not be flown except in limited defined circumstances which don't apply in this context. Therefore, the recommendation in front of members today is that, subject to your views, Council is unable to participate in this initiative given current policy. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Ellen. Alderman Hussey.
Thank you, Chair. I'm totally opposed to this recommendation. I cannot see why we cannot accept that this is a limited defined circumstance. And I propose that the recommendation be rejected. and that we do partake in this particular event. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Heaney is my next indicated speaker.
Chair, well, not surprised. I disagree with Alderman Hussey. Almost like we have an established policy on council. It's been endorsed and the recommendation is in line with that. So in light of that, I'm happy to propose the recommendation as laid out.
I'll second that proposal.
That the recommendations be carried.
Chair, I was looking to speak on this just before. Sorry.
Yeah, Councillor Heaney had indicated in advance of you though, Alderman Devaney. As had a number of other members. Councillor Harkin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we would support the recommendation as well, not to participate in the Commonwealth event. From our point of view, this is the legacy of empire. That's what the Commonwealth represents. There's very lofty aspirations in the document about promoting peace, opposing war, challenging racism, campaigning for equality. But the British government is at the centre of this project, and the British government continues to use the Commonwealth as a platform to promote the interests of the wealthiest sections of British society. Just one example is Africa, which was at the heart of the British Empire, and British businesses still control and dominate up to nearly £1 trillion of wealth across Africa. That is gold, diamonds, oil and gas, while we have mass poverty and scarcity across Africa. And the British government has very much used the Commonwealth as a platform for continuing its dominance. And we even think about how the British government has treated the Windrush generation, people from the Caribbean. Absolutely disgusting, has nothing to do with the type of aspirations that are included in the document promoting the events. And finally, that there are Caribbean states who are trying to sue the British government for 400 years of slavery, and the British government is going all out to try and block that. So I think that this is about. I don't think our council should be part of a project that is about promoting the legacy of the British Empire. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harkin. Alderman Devaney.
Thank you, and I do apologise for coming in, Chair. I thought when you said the motion is carried, I thought that was the end of the discussion. But look, on behalf of the DEP, we will not be supporting the recommendation. Look, at the end of the day, I think it is, to me, it should have met the limited defined circumstances, and it is a peace flag at the end of the day. And we can all go back over history about organisations and stuff like that there. But Chair, we will be opposed to the recommendation.
No worries. Just so you know, it was just that somebody in the chamber had asked for clarity on what a proposal was. I wasn't trying to cut anybody off. Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair. Alderman Hussey, when he started speaking, said that he's totally opposed to the recommendation and then made a suggestion himself. I'm totally opposed to his suggestion and will be supporting the recommendation, and so will our group on this. We currently have a no flags policy within this council. We have it for a reason. It works. If we allow any movement on any policy, but particularly this one, I believe that we're only inviting difficulties further on down the road. I think we, as a council, corporately have stood very strong around that particular policy. And as I say, in my opinion, it works, and it works very well, and I don't see why we would deviate away from it now. If other organisations themselves outside of this council, across this district, choose to become involved in this project, if it's open to them, then that's their decision to take. But we would not be supporting council having anything to do with flying any particular flag, regardless of what it is, because, as I say, in our opinion, it only creates difficulties further on down the road, and we will be supporting the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney. Councillor Donlan.
Chair, I think this is, this issue, if we were to do this, it's very divisive. Ireland owes no allegiance, it has no allegiance to any British monarch, and that's the glue that holds these countries. That's what they have in common. This Commonwealth come originally from the Balfour Declaration, Imperial Conference in 1926, and unlike this report, it has a lot of language that sounds great. When it talks about that autonomous communities within the British Empire, equal in status, no way subordinate in any aspect of their domestic or external affairs. We don't have to go into history to know that this is a load of nonsense. When we look at the recent UK court ruled, when it ruled that there cannot be Scottish independence reference or a referendum without a Westminster approval. But throughout this report, as Councillor Harkin indicated, there's a lot of language that is, in my opinion, virtually out of place, because it talks about special values of small and vulnerable states, and special recognition and attention. And there's a former monarch who says, who's quoted as saying it's about friendship, loyalty, and the desire for freedom and peace. And then throughout further in the body of the documents, it says, there is a need to challenge intolerance and inequality. Jerry, you can't get any more symbol of inequality than a monarchy. And what that monarchy has done through its brutal colonization, its slavery, death and destruction, violation of sovereignty, and the denial of democracy. And only this week, we've heard one member of that monarchy openly admitted to having killed 25 people during a foreign invasion. And he described them as chess pieces that needed to be removed. But fortunately, Chair, that we've had Barbados, who recently rejected the monarchy and have now become a republic, and we see similar trends in Australia, where 54%, they support doing the same thing. Jamaica is making similar moves, and even in Britain, there's a growing trend, particularly amongst young people, of rejecting the monarchy. So I believe that we should not be participating in this. But can only be described as obscene. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Donnelly. Alderman Hussey, I'm going to ask you to be brief. I'm going to move it to a vote.
I'm going to propose an amendment to the proposed and seconded motion.
And what's your amendment?
The amendment is the recommendation as reading, but adding, but that council will consider support to any local organisation wishing to partake, and that would flow on from what Councillor Turney said in his remarks.
Just before that's taken, what do you mean by council support?
That's to be considered.
How can
we'll consider support.
I need to give me a wee second. Can you send that through? And do you have a seconder for that proposal? I take that as a no. Sorry. So at this stage, we're going to take a day of vote. The original recommendations on the report have been proposed and seconded. John, if I can pass over to you for a vote on that.
I can record a vote.
A recorded vote, if that's what you wish, no problem.
Alderman Breslin. Alderman Devaney.
Against.
Alderman Hussey. Alderman Thompson. Councillor Raymond Barr.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Donnelly.
For.
Councillor Farrell.
For.
Councillor Jackson.
For.
Councillor Heaney.
For.
Councillor McGinley.
For.
Councillor McHugh.
For, John.
Councillor Mooney.
For.
Councillor Norris. Councillor Tierney.
For.
Thank you, members. Chair, I've recorded 10 for and 2 against, so the recommendation.
Thank you, John and members. And that moves us on to item 12, which is the invitation to visit the Siege Museum, pages 139 to 144. And I'm going to pass back to Ellen for that report.
Yes, again through you, Chair, it's to advise members of correspondence received from the associated clubs of the Apprentice Boys of Derry General Committee, and in which there's an invitation extended to a delegation from the Council to visit the Siege Museum. The recommendation in front of members today then is subject to your particular views. Members may wish to consider nominating to a delegation to visit the museum. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Ellen. My first indicated speaker there is Alderman Devaney.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me in, and we will nominate at full council for this. And look, at the end of the day, I think I need to be reminded, Chair, of where this motion came out of. And I have to say, the Apprentice Boys, and I will declare an interest that I am a member of the Apprentice Boys. And you know, at the end of the day, the Apprentice Boys, we know where the issue was raised and around offensive material and divisive material. So this is the Apprentice Boys reaching out to bring members who maybe never have been within the Memorial Hall and see the true story of what happened during the siege, right up to the present day. And you know, it is an exciting museum. But Chair, I do want to just raise the issue and around offensive and divisive material. And we know the notice of motion that was put forward passed here at our full council in the past in relation to this. But I was disappointed to see that, you know, I think it was the Christmas festival, that there were reports about offensive and divisive material for sale there. And, you know, at the end of the day, I've seen photographs of some of the stuff portraying the Loughgall murders. And we all know about the heinous attacks that they carried out in that part of the area where they were carried out, and has to be condemned. But I have to say, Chair, you know, we have put wheels and gears in place to deal with this issue. And I've said before, when we raised this, you know, what is offensive to one isn't offensive to the other. And it's always a very, very difficult issue to challenge. But I'm asking, Chair, that a report on that, I'm proposing that a report on that come back to the relevant committee regarding that issue, to see how we as a council dealt with it, seeing it was one of our own council-led events. And that's what my proposal would be, that we get a report back to see how council dealt with it and how it was handled. Thank you, Chair.
Second that.
No problem. Thank you, Alderman Devaney and Alderman Hussey for seconding that proposal. We will action that. Councillor Jackson.
Okay, I suppose just on the paper that's in front of us, on behalf of Sinn Féin, I want to welcome the fact that the Apprentice Boys of Derry have taken the time to respond to council and acknowledge the concerns the council had raised. Now, our party have concerns around the direction of travel. Whilst we have no issue with an invitation to the Siege Museum, but as Alderman Devaney has highlighted, the correspondence originated from offensive material that was sold during an Apprentice Boys parade, and we requested that the Apprentice Boys come to committee, they come into council to discuss the concerns the council have and how we can ensure and work together to ensure that any future parades within our city and any future events that are carried out are done in an inclusive way that's free from sectarianism and in any deliberate attempt to cause hurt and division. So I believe that request still stands. We've requested that the Apprentice Boys, representatives from the Apprentice Boys, attend this council. It's in the public interest to have those questions asked and that reassurance sort of rubber stamped that that we can move forward together. And suppose the recommendation or the suggested way forward is a worrying deviation from the direction of travel that we had requested. Whilst we acknowledge and accept the fact that there has an invitation there, our invitation still stands. We wish the apprentice boys to come before this committee and speak to us as elected representatives. And following that, we would welcome the invitation and again in turn accept their invitation to attend the Seas Museum and learn more from them. So I don't want to put the cart before the horse. The invitation from us still stands, and I would respectfully request council to go back to the apprentice boys and reiterate our invitation to attend the committee, and hopefully we can move forward in that vein. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair. And I welcome the fact that the apprentice boys of Derry have issued an invitation to councillors. I do have to admit, when reading the report and reflecting on some of the stuff that Councillor Jackson was referring to, I was slightly puzzled because the invitation was about the selling of offensive material and how we could support the apprentice boys in their activities around that particular time going forward. I spoke at length about that at that particular time. And then when I read the report, it was to do a tour of the Seas Museum and learn, and I think Alderman Devaney said it when he was speaking there, to learn about what happened here in the siege. That's great and would be really interesting, and I would be definitely well up for it. But it doesn't look at the issue that was raised, and it doesn't look at the reason for that particular invitation to be issued. But I think it's welcome that the apprentice boys recognise that there was an invitation sent by council, but I think we might slightly have a little bit more work to do around it. We will, if this is going forward, we would welcome the fact and welcome the opportunity and personally, I would welcome the opportunity to go up around the museum and see what's in it, because I've never been in it, and Alderman Devaney said probably some councillors here have never been in the Memorial Hall. I haven't been, and it would be something that I would be interested in doing. So if we get to that point, yes, absolutely. But I think we have a wee bit of work to do between now and then. And we will nominate, if we are taking on this invitation, we will nominate at a later date. In relation to some of the stuff that Councillor Devaney also spoke about around the Christmas market, and he's looking for a report. I have no issue with that report coming back. I think he said he wants to know what council did around that particular time and how they handled it. It's my understanding that when officers became aware the stuff was removed. But if he wants that in a report, then give it to him in a report. But that's my understanding. I think it was a Saturday evening, late on, I was in contact with the Chief Executive around that particular issue. And at the time of this original discussion around September time, around offensive material and how we determine that, I had made it very clear that it didn't matter to me whether it offended a nationalist or unionist. If it was offending anybody, it shouldn't be there. And I stand over that position. So we have no issue with the report. We, in my opinion, took the same approach in December as we did in August, because we understand that it is difficult to identify what may or may not cause offence, which is why we didn't want to get into a list scenario whenever that was suggested in September. But what we do need to look at, in our opinion, is a robust decision-making process which protects officers as well. And they go through a number of stages, and at the end, if it's deemed offensive by the policy and by the policy, then it's removed, rather than putting the responsibility to an officer who's out maybe at the Christmas market or who's out at other events where council may have issued a licence or a permit. And we would like, I said it at the time, and I reiterate it now because of what happened in December. It's not fair on the officers who are out on the ground to have to use their judgment on whether something will be deemed offensive or not in here by us, because it might not be offensive to them and they might not see it the same way that I see it. So there needs to be a robust decision-making process which protects them and supports them. And at the end of it, they're able to explain why or why not a particular item was removed from a stall. And I think until we get to that point, we're going to keep having these issues coming back because what Alderman Devaney finds offensive, I don't, but Derek might find offensive, somebody else might not, and you're just going round in circles, and we're going to keep on having these discussions. And eventually, we'll probably end up having no stalls because nobody's going to know what they're going to be allowed to sell across there in Strabane in a council stall. So we need to get to that point, and I think we need to get to that point now in the winter time when there's not very many festivals coming on, and we need to have that work done now so that heading into next summer or this summer, we're not continuously having these discussions. But in terms of the report, we'll nominate at a further point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney. Councillor Donnelly.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, look, I have been in the museum. I think it was actually a council event that was organised and very few people turned up at it. I think Councillor Boyle was one of the others who were there. I found it very interesting. Look, I know that this came about as a result of dialogue or conversations or motions within council regarding offensive material. And again, as it has already been pointed out by a number of speakers here tonight, I believe offence is in the eyes of the beholder. You know what, and I know myself and Councillor Gallagher said, you know, at the time that emotion probably wasn't the best way to deal with that. I take on board Councillor Jackson and what he has said. You know, it's not ideal, but I think, you know, if we are to get, you know, have conversations and dialogue, then I have no issue of again visiting the museum. However, there is one aspect of it, and it's regarding a dialogue with the Bogside Residents Group. Chair, for myself, and I no doubt many people, probably in their thousands, you know, I think this is a bit bizarre, as in my understanding that this group hasn't been heard of in over a decade. So if one thing from this visit and conversation, I would like to ask a wee bit more about that. But look, I think it should happen and we should have that engagement. As again, regarding the offence, I have absolutely no issue with memorabilia commemorating the Lockall murders. I can understand why others would. And again, at the time of the motion, you know, there was a mention that the PSNI would be involved. Again, that was unacceptable to me, not because I want to see UVF or paraflags being sold, but because I believe that it would lead to a process where these people would be the judges and they would decide what is, you know, offensive and what is not. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Donnelly. Alderman Hussey.
Thank you, Chair. Could I urge members of committee to look at the letter? This is more than an invitation for a wee tour around the Siege Museum. I do know that this matter, I'm not a member of General Committee myself, but was discussed at the highest level of the internal organisation of the Apprentice Boys of Derry. And this is the response that has come to council. So there is an invitation to come along to the Siege Museum, and I trust that members will partake of that in the same way that I have had invitations to the Free Derry Museum, and I've been at that. So I trust that members here will take the opportunity. But I would ask members to look further in the same paragraph. General Committee officers, these are the top officers in the organisation, the association, will be pleased to conduct a guided tour of the museum and the meeting rooms within the Memorial Hall. This may be followed with a general conversation where we will be pleased to respond to any further queries that require identification. So it is an offer to engage with this committee. Now, it may be a case that the organisation is saying, no, we're not going to the headmaster's office, but we're quite happy to sit down with you. So I would, in a spirit of cooperation on an issue that does concern members of the apprentice boys, that this committee would meet the apprentice boys and be who are prepared to discuss and be prepared to discuss with them the issues that are of concern to members. So I would like to be part of that delegation if the delegation is agreed when it comes about. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Hussey. Alderman Guy.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me in. I'm not a member of this here committee, but and I declare an interest as a member of the Apprentice Boys and also someone who works in the Siege Museum. Totally agree with the last two speakers. Totally agree with what my colleague has said there, Derek Hussey, that basically the invite is, and it clearly states at the end of it, that there can be further discussions during or after the guided tour. It's what we do. We take schools from both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland round. Schools from the Republic, 20% will are leaving cert. We take them around the museum. We finish in the meeting room, and then it's a question and answer session. And it'll be no different for council whenever they attend. So I don't know what Councillor Jackson, maybe hasn't read the letter properly, but there will be a chance to ask questions at the end of the tour. But it's just to let you see what actually goes on within the museum and within the hall itself. Now, going back there to what Councillor Donnelly says, and I agree with him, what people find offensive, the other person won't find offensive. And that's just the way we find ourselves in this society. I was sent photographs of the Christmas market, the items that were seen on sale. These items, which depicted glorified Republican terrorists, many of them carried out callous murders of innocent civilians, serving RUC officers, UDR and British Army personnel. And I agree that there's people in this committee today who won't have the same idea of me, of what these people whose murders they carried out. But that's where we differentiate. And, that's why when we go along to these things that we find, somebody might find something offensive that the other person doesn't. And this is why, going back to the motion in September, that I said that at least there needs to be a list here. Now, on that there occasion, I contacted Head of Environmental Services. They got back to me straight away that night. They spoke with the person who was in charge of the stall. They agreed to remove the offensive items. However, on the Sunday, the following day, there was still items for sale that people in my community found offensive. And I was sent further photographs. Now, obviously, what was agreed in September wasn't actually put through. I think it doesn't go through to February, if I'm correct. But in speaking with one of the officers who oversees the Walled City Market, they felt that unless they actually get guidance to what people find offensive or what the person doesn't find offensive, then they're going to have their hands tied behind their back until and it's going to be an ongoing scenario where people are going, oh, well, that's offensive there, you need to remove this, or that's offensive to me, you need to remove that. They need guidance. We need further discussions in this, and if it means going into a working group to sort out that guidance, then so be it. But we're going to have to seriously sort something out here, because it's not fair on the officers to be left to look after this here and decide what and what isn't offensive. Thank you for letting me in there as well, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Guy. Councillor Jackson, we looking back on?
Yeah, thanks. And just for Alderman Guy's benefit, I have considerably read the letter that was issued. I've actually read it quite a few times, and I fully understand the sentiment behind it and accept it. And I'm going to be blunt in relation to the motion that came before council, like Councillor Donnelly, I think we've been mentioned at the time that we were disappointed to see the motion because it's not the way that we felt that issue should have been addressed. But the motion did come, and it was a position of council. So regardless of whether or not that was the way we felt the best way to have the discussion and challenge the sale of offensive material, the fact remains is that this council has taken a decision and has issued an invitation, and that was the direction of travel of this council. And the Apprentice Boys of Derry are suggesting another way forward, which again, there's merits in terms of that approach. Any form of dialogue is welcome, but it's in the public domain. I think it was Councillor Doyle brought the issue into the public domain, and I think there's public interest in terms of hearing the response from the Apprentice Boys. So I just wanted to formalise a proposal that we reiterate Council's current position, that we request a deputation to this committee from the Apprentice Boys of Derry following that notice of motion, because regardless, we don't want to undermine any decisions of council. Any further deputations or requests to bring people under this committee could be undermined by taking a different approach and suggesting doing another meeting behind closed doors. So I want to formalise that we separate the response and the invitation from the Apprentice Boys to visit the Seas Museum by reiterating our request for a deputation to come to this committee. And just in relation to the points that had been made by Alderman Guy and Alderman Devaney in relation to the Christmas markets, it does seem strange that whilst in September, when we were discussing a policy to try and deal with the sale of material that some may deem offensive, they're the very people who completely opposed that policy. And it doesn't make sense. It really doesn't make sense. If we want to, as Councillor Tierney has stated, if we want to create a policy that protects council officers and protects this council in relation to anyone who is deliberately trying to cause offence, then that we shouldn't be prescriptive in relation to who is being offended. So that was the sentiment that we supported the motion in September, and I agree it should be applied right across the board. So, but I just wanted to come back in to make a formal proposal that we reiterate our invitation, we send our invitation to the Apprentice Boys of Derry to come before this committee in a public forum to hear and answer any questions that elected members may have. Thank you, Chair.
And just for clarity, is that in addition to the recommendations on the report? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And you second it, Councillor Tierney?
Yes, I'm happy to say.
Okay, no bother. Councillor Tierney, you were looking back on briefly, I think you said.
Well, I was going to be brief, but there's been a lot said since then that I have to respond to. I understand the sentiment behind the amendment. But I would cautiously say that I think we might be splitting hairs. To be honest, I fully appreciate that the outcome of the notice of motion was for the Apprentice Boys to come to this committee. Last month, we sat here and every one of us, Councillor Jackson included, gave off about Seagate's refusal to meet with council. I remember being in this chamber, well, it was online at that stage, when people were constantly giving off that the former detective inspector, Darren Jones, superintendent or whatever he was at that time, Darren Jones refused to come to this committee. I remember people giving off that the chief constable refused to come to council. Members of the policing board refused to come to council. In my opinion, the apprentice boys have responded. They've reached out. They're open to dialogue. The letter states that there's an opportunity there to have a discussion afterwards. Are we now going to refuse, and I don't want to over-egg the pudding, but are we now going to refuse the hand of friendship, the hand of cooperation, and hopefully the hand of dialogue? Because some people want to get them on here, because they want them to come here so that it's in the public. I get all of the public stuff, but I actually think that this invitation could be the beginning of something. Councillor Donnelly referenced the Bogside Residents Group and the dialogue that they have with them, and I would share a lot of his concerns. This is an opportunity, I think, for the apprentice boys now to come and open dialogue with us as elected members, and I don't think it's a good idea to be refusing that invitation unless you take up our invitation first. You know, they have made efforts, rightly. Councillor Jackson's right, not to the letter of the notice of motion, but they have made an effort. I don't think we should turn that down. We will attend the Siege Museum. We're more than happy to do so. We're also more than happy for it to be a meeting publicly, but we're not prescriptive one way or the other. We would like to see both happen, if possible, and maybe, just maybe, the visit to the Siege Museum could be the precursor for the apprentice boys coming before this committee, and maybe that's what we want to do. But rather than another amendment, would it not be an idea to defer this paper until full council, allow officers the opportunity to put that to the apprentice boys and have another discussion at full council around this, as opposed to having another big story where councillors are falling out with the apprentice boys and refusing and all of that nonsense. Let's just try and quietly get this done so that everybody's happy. The apprentice boys are comfortable that their offer has been accepted, and that council are comfortable that the apprentice boys know that we still want them before this committee. I think that's a reasonable approach. Around some of the stuff around what Alderman Guy was talking about, around what is and isn't deemed offensive. In September, when I was talking about a robust decision-making process to protect officers, Alderman Guy was one of the people who spoke against me and here in Radio Foyle and in social media. Listening to him today, he's actually come round to the fact that we need to have a decision-making process to try and protect officers as opposed to a list. I think that's something that is welcome. He made a suggestion around the working group. We have no issue with that. But I think everyone's agreed that unless there's support there and a directive policy, we're going to keep having these discussions. And it's just going to go on and on. So we need to break that cycle, in our opinion. And if a working group is being suggested, then we'll definitely be there. In relation to the invitation, I would just have one question, and maybe this could be provided for full council. How many is included in the deputation? Because I think that would be keen. I would like to see, from our point of view, as many SDLP councillors involved in that discussion to open up that chain and that dialogue. So if that could be answered, and maybe, and I'm appealing to Councillor Jackson, maybe we could hold off on the amendment until full council and allow officers that little bit of time, and those members who are here who are involved with the apprentice boys to, and I don't know what way that organisation's set up in terms of parent clubs and all of that. To feed that back into the general committee and make sure that they know exactly what this council's asking them for, and have that discussion come full council. And hopefully we're able to move it forward that way. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Sharon. Just for complete clarity, there's nowhere in the amendment that we state that we reject or refuse the invitation from the Apprentice Boys of Derry. It's simply restating that the invitation to come to this committee. So there's nothing there that would merit deferral to full council. The amendment is that we formally reissue an invitation to this council, but there's no suggestion that we refuse or reject any invitation to the Siege Museum. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Harkin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, look, I look forward to a visit to the Siege Museum. I think that'll be a good experience. I also think we should reissue the invitation to the Apprentice Boys of Derry to come here and have a discussion with us. I don't support the idea of trying to ratchet up sectarian tensions unnecessarily. This place can be a sectarian cesspool, whether it's putting up UVS flags or people going under the fountain and throwing bricks through people's homes. In terms of the dialogue, I welcome dialogue. And there's lots of dialogue happening that's not necessarily between the political parties represented here. There's lots of dialogue happening about how people are resisting Tory cuts, about how people are trying to save the health service, how people are building support for picket lines, be it the housing executive workers, nurses, health and social care workers. I think that's the key dialogue in many ways that's happening. How do people get protection from the cost of living crisis? Those are huge discussions that are happening. I also think that we have to look at the root of our problems here. We have 2 failed states in this island, and I think people are going to have to look at how we got here, how we created a sectarian cesspool, and how we get out of it. And those discussions are happening, and they're happening, as people know, in all communities.
Chair, can I make one small comment, please? Thank you. And it's just in relation to the letter that was sent to the Apprentice Boys. And by reading the letter, you'll understand, I think, their response. The second bullet point of the letter reads, "Write to the Apprentice Boys of Derry, Associated General Club Committee, expressing concern on behalf of many of our constituents regarding the above, and seek a deputation from relevant Apprentice Boys of Derry officers," which technically is what they've done. They've offered a deputation. They've offered, it doesn't say delegation, Chair, it says deputation. Well, I'm reading the invite here, and the second bullet point doesn't mention delegation. It reads deputation. I'm just after reading it out. And they've responded in that vein and offered a deputation. Now,
it's open interpretation.
It's open to interpretation in many ways, but I think they're responding to our invitation, which technically may not have been issued in the way that Councillor Jackson is thought that it may have been issued, and therefore I think we're even splitting hairs even more now, because they'll be wondering, going, well, you asked for a deputation, we've offered you a deputation, why, it's, I just think that's an important point to clear up.
I'm trying not to split hairs, right? But see where I'm reading the Apprentice Boys letter, you're reading from the council's invite, the second bullet point, in their response, in their last line. "I look forward to hearing from you at your earliest convenience and welcoming your delegation to the Siege Museum." Delegation, not deputation. It's 2 different terms, 2 different things. A deputation is where you present the council. So
Right.
it's just for the clarity on that. But I have a number
And
of
I'm also trying not to split hairs, Chair, but whether it's deputation or delegation, the point is that it was never stated in the letter that they had to come to council. They were asking for a deputation stroke delegation,
Right.
and that's what they've offered.
Okay. Alderman Guy is our next indicated speaker.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'd just like to point out that going back to September's motion, when we didn't support it, and I clearly stated my reasons why, and one of them was because I felt it wasn't clear enough that we needed some form of list, and because there was too many grey areas in just leaving it in the way that it was being left. Now, that obviously with a list, we weren't going to sit in that meeting and work it out. So the best way to do it was sitting in a working group. So it's nothing new. It was just rejected at the time that anybody would go to a working group to try and discuss it more. The calls from a list from me were rejected, but after speaking to the officers, they're looking for guidance on it. So it might come down to a list in the end up. But if you want to get into a working group, I will certainly turn up to have these discussions. But I'd also like to point out that there was members at the end of that discussion because of that motion who made the comment, if it's not broke, it doesn't need fixed. The apprentice boys meet with the residents groups and other groups around trading and other issues around the town come August and December. Council doesn't need to get involved. I think the fact that they've reached out, they've made the invitation to the Siege Museum and are willing to have conversations at the end of their tour. I think, you know what, I think that's an excellent move by them. I think it should be welcomed by all. And I think the opportunity should be taken up because I don't think they need to come in because, you know what, they don't need to get involved with council. They already speak to enough people. They're willing to speak and talk about what was probably going on that day, and they should be given the opportunity. And I think that's the best you can hope for. Thank you, Chair.
Alderman Guy, Alderman Hussey.
Chair, I'm not going to go back to September or anything else. We're at a situation where the apprentice boys have stepped forward, offered the hand of engagement. Surely to goodness, this council can step forward, offer their hand of engagement. After that meeting, if some people determine that, you summon them to the headmaster's office, so be it. But let's have the engagement. Let's have that dialogue. Let's have that engagement.
Alderman Devaney.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me in. And first of all, I just want to put on record, Chair, is look, the important work that the apprentice boys have done over this last 10, maybe 12 years, 15 years, whatever it is, in moving the parading issue through Londonderry and working with relevant groups and stakeholders within the city. And I think they have to be commended for the work that we have done. They have done, and I have to say, we need to be very, very careful here not to start to unravel all of that good work. And back to the September meeting, very, very clearly, I did not support the notice of motion coming forward because there was an emphasis on the apprentice boys because of flags that were for sale. Whether you find them offensive or not, it had nothing to do with the apprentice boys. They have nothing to do with the sale of merchandise. As we were told, it's down to licensing. And we agree, while we didn't agree with that, the notice of motion went through, it was carried, it became council policy. And here, lo and betide, the first event that happens that we have a complaint in around offensive material from the PUL community solely happens at an event which is council led. And that's why I have asked for a report coming back to see how that was organised, to see how we got through it, and maybe learn lessons from it as we move forward. But once again, as far as the first part of inviting the invitation to attend the Memorial Hall, I do believe it is a genuine handout to councillors or officers if they want to attend. At the end of the day, you can the invitation went to them. It's your own perception which way it reads, but I do believe we're splitting hairs here, and I believe it was a very positive move by the Prentice Boys to reach out, bring us to the museum, and then look, have discussions and around. And as the previous speaker said, let's do that, and then look, then see how we get on after that meeting. But as far as the second recommendation now, I don't know whether that's an amendment or a separate recommendation. You know, a request from a deputation of the Prentice Boys to attend a meeting with this committee. I would be totally opposed to that, Chair. Not in the climate now that the Apprentice Boys have reached out to the members of this committee and council, and we would be opposed to the second part, but very, very much support the first part. Thank you, Mayor, or Chair, sorry.
Thank you, Alderman Devaney. Councillor Jackson, you were looking back on briefly, were you? Are you all right? Okay. Right, okay.
So just thank you, Chair. Just for clarity, I understand the amendment that's on the floor. It's been proposed, seconded, and presumably, Chair, you'll wish to move to a vote on that. But just to be clear, it's an amendment. The recommendation under 5.1 is that subject to members' comments, members may wish to consider nominations to a delegation to visit the Siege Museum. So the suggestion, just for clarity, the suggestion is this is an amendment to 5.1, but that doesn't really make sense, if you know.
And in addition to that, would be the council reiterates our request. But in relation to the recommendation is that members may wish, and some members have indicated and will indicate that we will nominate, we'll make nominations at a later date. So the recommendation in that regard still stands. But this is in addition to that, in addition to members making nominations to a delegation to the Siege Museum, that we reiterate our request for the Apprentice Boys of Derry to attend a meeting of this committee.
It might be useful, therefore, if that was worded like that, so it was absolutely clear if that could be suggested.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay.
So it's just in addition to the end of the recommendation.
Okay. So if you just give us a wee moment. Will consider nominations to a delegation to visit the Siege Museum. Of that. That. So that, yeah. But that, no, but that, and then bring it up. Content, members, if that's what you're.
Chair, for clarification, is that a full, that's actually the proposal, but there are members, as I understand it, content to support the first part of that as a motion, but the second part then was what was the original amendment, and there are people not prepared to support that element. So is that a full proposal, or is that a proposal as amended?
I think, Chair, the issue is the recommendation in itself is that members consider what they want to do. It's that the amendment as suggested can't be bolted on to the wording of 5.1 as it stands. So effectively, it's a separate proposal. And it must be considered in its own right. And then whether it passes or falls, something else needs to be considered. It's it's essentially, as it originally stood, it's essentially a proposal that stands in its own right. Yeah, it should be separate. So therefore you would remove the members will consider nominations, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Because the recommendation is that members consider what to do, not something more specific, if that makes sense. So therefore, the correct way to deal with this, in my view, Chair, it's just simply my view, is that the proposal from the floor is a proposal, not an amendment. And you must vote on the proposal. We go back to what the proposal was from the floor originally.
Well, given that, then, Chair, can I have a judgment as to whether the following would be considered as an amendment? That members nominate to a delegation to visit the Siege Museum, full stop.
Well, Chair, if you don't mind, I think we need to go back to what the proposal was from the floor initially then, and committee clerk, just follow, if you don't mind, just taking out the first bit, and we start again with council reiterates its request. That's the proposal from the floor. But it's not an amendment to the recommendation, if that makes sense. So that's now been proposed and seconded, Chair.
Yep.
And if there are any further amendments proposed, they need to be taken in order.
Councillor Tierney, go ahead.
I'm going to throw a bigger spanner in the works, John. I read out the bullet point from the invitation that was sent, and the apprentice boys weren't invited to attend a meeting of this committee. Yeah. So does that stand? Based on the letter that council sent?
Chair, I know this issue has been, I think the word was splitting hairs.
Yeah.
The proposal does invite the apprentice boys, a deputation from the apprentice boys. Whether that was misinterpreted or not, I can't say. But a deputation normally means a deputation to council.
Go ahead if you saw them.
That proposal reads that council reiterates its request for a deputation from the apprentice boys of Derry to attend a meeting with this committee. Based on the letter that council sent, we didn't ask them to attend a meeting of this committee.
Yeah.
So how can we reiterate something which we haven't issued?
Councillor Jackson.
Chair, I just want to say that I'm sort of disappointed. I'm extremely disappointed that we've sort of verged into this territory, and when we made the proposal, it was with all the best intentions to maintain the integrity of this council and decisions that this council have taken. But in light of the discussion and I suppose to avoid any confusion around deputations or any suggestion of sleight of hand or anything like that, I'm going to withdraw the proposal. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Jackson. So that leaves us with the original recommendations in the report.
Chair, just to put that into proper form then, as the Chief Executive has pointed out, I propose that council nominate to a delegation. What's the rest of the wording there?
The original recommendation, Alderman Hussey, is that subject to members' comments, members may wish to consider nominations to a delegation to visit the Siege Museum.
Yeah, so that council nominate to a delegation, nominate members to a delegation to attend the Siege Museum.
Two wee seconds, Gary Donnelly, or Councillor Donnelly has been in the wee chat box there, so I'll bring him on first and then Councillor Jackson.
Look, Chair, maybe I'm getting the wrong end of the stick here. It's been very, I agree with Councillor Jackson. Has just went down a road that, in my view, makes us all look very silly. Anybody watching on here? But I'm under the impression that it'll go back now to the original, what was in the papers. And if that is the case, Chair, can I suggest that this is open to all independent councillors rather than excluding any, give them the opportunity if they may or may not wish to attend?
Chair, on that, I mean, I've simply said we'll nominate. I haven't stipulated how many will nominate or anything. And I think it should be added to that, and we'll meet with officers of the General Committee of the Apprentice Boys while there.
Can you clarify your proposal? Because within the invitation, it indicates that that meeting would happen regardless.
Council will nominate a delegation to visit the Siege Museum and will meet with officers of the General Committee of the Apprentice Boys of Derry while there. Yeah. But we're agreeing to both parts, the visit to the museum and...
Firstly, do you have a seconder for your proposal?
I'll second it. Chair Morris.
Okay. Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, we've no issue with the proposal. We would like to see, prior to any nominations, some further clarity in relation to the makeup of the delegation. I was careful to choose me delegation or deputation, but we would like to see some further clarity in relation to the dates, times, and the makeup of the delegation prior to any nominations. But in relation to in terms of the wording that's in front of us today, we're fully supportive of it. Thanks.
Councillor Tierney.
We've no real issue with the proposal that's there now. I find it strange that we're almost setting the agenda for a meeting before we get there. Is that right? And I think Councillor Donnelly's right. We're nearly making ourselves look very, very petty, in my opinion, at this stage. We will nominate to the deputation at a later date because we want to see how many of our councillors can actually attend, because I think that's important. So if we can get that back, we have no issue with accepting the invitation, meeting with the General Committee, and going around the museum and doing whatever else you want to add on to the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Barr.
Thank you, Chair. Just have to get this off my chest. Can I just say that I think the whole conversation around this issue has been partial, and it's a very sad reflection of this committee.
Thanks for that. So at the minute, I haven't heard anybody speaking against the proposal as it stands. So I don't think we need to go to a vote in that regard. Seems unanimous. So unless anybody wants to say different, please do so now. Happy enough. So that'll pass. And that'll be the recommendation from that report. Thank you. The next three items are open for information. If anybody wishes to raise anything within those at this stage? No? Okay. Can I get a proposer to move into confidential? And a seconder, please. Councillor Heaney, thank you. So folks, we are now in confidential.